Chapter 668. No one knew whether Haotian would laugh when humans were thinking, and no one knew whether Haotian would laugh when humans were fighting. However, thinking or fighting was ultimately the business of humans. Whether Haotian would laugh or not, humans would continue to do it, either thinking hard or fighting with their lives on the line. The goshawk flew away and the dark clouds approached. The war on the wilderness continued. Every moment, there were people falling, swords breaking, and blood gushing out. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated, but no one knew if it was because the cavalry could not charge at high speed, or because the ground was soaked in blood and covered with corpses. In the middle of the battlefield, the powerful desolate warriors kept charging forward. They had already torn a huge gap in the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. Even the legendary papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were a little unstable due to their charge. Of course, they also paid a terrible price for it. Many desolate warriors fell on the path of the charge. His leather clothes trembled in the bloody wind, and then he dragged out several shadows. Tang, who was bathed in blood, was like a burning stone. He ran amuck on the battlefield, sending more than 10 warhorses flying. He tore several priests of the West Hill Divine Palace to pieces with his bare hands, and then he finally arrived in front of Luokadi. Blood flowed down from Tang's body like a waterfall. It was the enemy's, not his. The internal organs of a priest hung on his shoulder. The scene was extremely bloody. Luokadi knew who he was. His face suddenly turned pale, and fear took over his body and mind. He instinctively wanted to dodge or escape, but he knew that if he dodged or turned to escape, he would be smashed into pieces by Tang's fist the next moment. Even if he was lucky to survive, the Hierarch Lord would give him a more tragic ending. With a loud roar, Luokadi waved the god-given blade and chopped down at Tang's head. The blade whistled in the air, and the golden talisman lines on the blade suddenly lit up, and its power suddenly increased. Tang looked at the descending saber expressionlessly. He threw out a straight punch. His mountain-like fist smashed onto the blade of Luokadi's saber. The edge of the saber cracked, and then the hilt of the saber cracked. The web between Luokadi's thumb and index finger, which was holding onto the hilt of the saber, split open. Then, that frighteningly huge force followed along his arm and attacked upward. His shoulder blade broke with a cracking sound. Luokadi spat out a mouthful of fresh blood and fell backward. His left hand turned into a saber and fiercely chopped at his own shoulder. He forcefully used his strength to cut off the invasion of that force. Only then did he luckily survive. The moment he landed on the ground, Tang's body leaped into the air and stepped on his head. Looking at the bloodied soul that was getting closer and closer, Luokadi's eyes revealed a look of despair. His current emotions were similar to Qing Ziqing's when he sensed the terrifying and blazing fist intent. However, just like Qing Ziqing, at the moment before death, a bolt of lightning saved his life. The lightning in the low altitude of the wilderness had been chasing Tang's figure for a long time, but they were unable to catch up. However, at the moment when Tang seriously injured Luokadi, they finally caught up. Tang stomped heavily on the ground and forced the lightning into the ground. The ground of the wilderness, which had been moistened by blood for a long time, shook. Between the broken grass and branches, a lot of blood actually squeezed out. There was a flash of lightning, and within it, a sword appeared quietly and pierced Tang's abdomen. Tang was the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He might even be the last wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He was very powerful. Whether it was the expert from the sword garret, Qing Ziqing or Luokadi, they were no match for him. In this world, it was very difficult for a sword to pierce his body. However, at this moment, he was pierced. Even if he was pierced, with the strength of Tang's body, it would be difficult for a sword to pierce his body. However, this sword pierced his body, and it was very deep. Blood seeped from the edge of the sword. It was not an extremely sharp sword, nor was it the unparalleled sword beside the quiet pool in the sword garret. It was just a thin wooden sword. The wooden sword was exactly the same as it had been more than a decade ago, except that there was an additional hilt. The person holding the hilt of the wooden sword was, of course, Yi Su. Tang was the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, while Yi Su was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. The two of them were like two sides of the world. One day they would definitely meet and then fight to the death. They were all people at the peak of the world, and each had their own pride. Yi Su faced Jun Mo of the Academy in the Lank Temple. When Jun Mo turned around, he turned around. In today's battle in the wilderness, he also did not bother to kill the ordinary desolate soldiers. Instead, he focused his spirit on Tang alone. Of course, there was no absolute fairness. Other than avoiding Yi Su's sword, Tang also had to protect his own people and fight against the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. More importantly, he had led the Desolate Man tribe to fight against the people of the Central Plains in the wilderness for many days. More accurately, he had been fighting for several years. Yi Su, who had been cultivating his spirit for a long time and was at his peak, faced the exhausted Tang. The result of this battle was not difficult to imagine. The wooden sword pierced deeply into Tang's abdomen, and then there was a thunderous sound. A bright red wound opened up in Tang's abdomen. Blood flowed from his eyes, mouth, and nose. This time, it was not the blood of the enemy, but his own blood. As soon as they met, Tang was seriously injured. However, there was still no expression on his face, much less any fear. His legs suddenly burst into flames. The bright red flames were like magma in a volcano, blazing hot and heavy. His right leg left the ground at a very strange angle, and then kicked downwards. He was clearly standing on the ground, and his right leg was clearly raised to half a person's height. However, when his right leg fell downwards, the foot in the leather boot seemed to step down from the sky. There was a crisp sound. Tang's right foot stepped hard on the wooden sword, and it broke in the middle. The wooden sword was now deeply embedded in his abdomen. Tang's right foot stepping on the broken wooden sword was equivalent to hitting his own abdomen, stirring up his internal organs. However, there was still no expression on his face. Yi Su's face was slightly pale. His right hand released the hilt of the sword, and he did not hesitate to abandon the sword. His thin Taoist robe danced in the wind of the wilderness. An extremely ethereal chi of heaven and earth attacked him, and he retreated 100 feet with the wind. Tang's mountain-like right fist was already clenched tightly, hanging by his waist. He was about to strike, but he did not because Yi Su's figure was no longer in front of him. Even if he struck, he would only hit empty air. Blood kept gushing out, and Tang's face finally revealed a trace of exhaustion. Then, he reached out to pull out half of the wooden sword from his abdomen, and slowly knelt down on one knee, panting deeply. The top master of the Desolate Man, Tang, had been seriously injured by Yi Su, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. At this point in the war on the wilderness, it seemed that the outcome could finally be seen clearly. The sounds of killing on the battlefield gradually subsided. The desperate advance of the Desolate Man was finally stopped by the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, the charge of more than 10,000 cavalrymen of the Tang Empire in the west was unstoppable. Just before the Desolate Man's tribe faced the disaster of extinction, a low and orderly chanting of sutras sounded. The Desolate Man soldiers who were seriously injured and could no longer fight began to chant a sutra with several senior statesmen. The sutra was not long, but the syllables were very complicated. It was obviously not the commonly used Central Plains characters, which the Desolate Man also used. It was more like the primitive characters of the west of the Ueluan Kingdom. The Desolate Man soldiers and the leading statesmen did not know that the sutra came from the legendary Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. As the sound of the sutra reverberated in the wilderness, a faintly discernible aura began to appear on the battlefield. This aura was extremely compassionate and abnormally quiet, as if it came from the blood and the twisted or broken corpses on the battlefield. It clearly showed the meaning of death and reincarnation. The great statesman of the desolate man's tribe stood up with difficulty with the help of a young man. He looked at Tang, who was kneeling on one knee in the middle of the battlefield, and a trace of determination appeared in the deep wrinkles on his face. The great elder also began to chant the same scripture. His voice was very hoarse, but it was also extremely loud and clear. It was like the wind that blew across the wasteland, almost like a shout. In the center of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the tall figure standing on the platform of the giant chariot froze slightly. The hierarch lord listened to the sutra chanting in the wilderness and the shouting of the desolate statesman. He silently thought that if the monks of the Xiankong Temple had not disobeyed the order and refused to come to the wilderness to help, he would not even have the chance to fight for his life. The Buddhism Vedanta of the Xiankong Temple was not here, so someone needed to fight with the desolate statesman spiritually. Otherwise, if the old man's almost shouting sutra continued on the battlefield, both the Central Plains Coalition Army and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace would pay a terrible price. In the face of the desolate statesman's chanting, even the tall figure on the giant chariot could only protect himself. Then who was qualified to fight with his life? In the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, only the old man was qualified. The wrinkles on the great divine priest of Revelation's face deepened. He listened to the sutra chanting from the far north and the shouting of the old man. He calmly said, "The heavenly mandate begins with darkness, the beginning of light." Then he continued, "The heavenly mandate begins with sacrifice, the beginning of good." Finally, he said, "The heavenly mandate begins with light, the beginning of man." After saying these 3 sentences, the wrinkles on the great divine priest of Revelation's face seemed to be carved into his cheeks, flesh, and even bones. 2 extremely thick streams of blood flowed out from the corners of his eyes. Around the great divine priest of Revelation's divine chariot, the faces of the 7 priests in red were already withered. Their black hair suddenly turned white, and they aged a few hundred years in an instant. They had long stopped breathing. The desolate statesman slowly closed his eyes and fell backward. The young desolate man warrior who was supporting him did not know what had happened. He held his body in sorrow and was speechless. The wounded desolate men around him struggled to stand up and then knelt down. The great statesman's mental strength was very strong. Compared to the great divine priest of Revelation, who had the strongest mental strength in the West Hill Divine Palace, there was still a small gap. So in the end, he died. This was a battle that seemed simple but was actually extremely dangerous. The great divine priest of Revelation finally used up the lifespan of 7 red-robed priests to win, and the desolate great elder did not make use of any of the desolate men until his death. In this sense, no one knew who was stronger. Chapter 4 tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 669. As for the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom stayed in capital Qing. The South Jin Kingdom troops that entered the wilderness were personally led by the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom. In the previous bloody battle, they had suffered heavy losses. Countless powerhouses from the Sword Garret had died, and the great divine priest of Revelation had been seriously injured. However, the true strength of the Allied forces was not affected much. There were also many foreign ministers of Taoism, like the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, who were silent and waiting. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, who was in the blood-colored divine chariot, had yet to fight today. She had killed 3 leaders of the desolate man warriors in the battle a few days ago, showing her terrifying power. One must know that the power of the leaders of the desolate man warriors was close to the peak of martial art. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace stayed in the huge divine chariot. The cavalry of the Tang Empire did not show their full strength during the several charges. The senior statesmen of the desolate man's tribe were either dead or injured. The first elder was killed on the spot, and the number one master, Tang, was seriously injured. More than a dozen powerful warrior leaders were either injured or dead. At this time, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army still had such a powerful force and so many backup plans. How could the desolate man not be desperate? The battle gradually stopped, but not for long. The Divine Hall Coalition Army sounded the drums again, and the army gathered again, ready to launch the last attack on the desolate man's tribe in the north. Tens of thousands of desolate warriors had suffered heavy casualties. Due to their strong bodies and willpower, most of them were seriously injured and no longer had the ability to fight. The clansmen looked at Tang, who was kneeling on one knee in the middle of the battlefield in the wilderness. They knew that the moment of annihilation was finally coming. The hard struggle and dreams of the past 1,000 years would finally come to nothing. There was a dead silence in the wilderness. Then, someone started to sing. The sad ballad floated in the wind, and the rough singing echoed in the wilderness. The sky is cold, the earth is cold, the goshawk does not dare to look at the north. The hot sea falls, the hot sea rises. Snow wolves are hunted by the hot sea. The snow wolf chases, the snow wolf dies. Holding a knife, I search for the deer all day long. Where to live, where to die, where to bury the white bones. Min Mountain is majestic, Min Mountain is magnificent. Min Mountain is the true hometown. Treading the boundless snow, trampling through 10,000 miles of frost, gazing south all day long. Treading the boundless snow, trampling through 10,000 miles of frost, no longer looking south. I'll go first, you can come after me. I'll fight first, then you. I'll die first, then you. The homeward journey is short, but the homeward journey is long. Let's embark on the homeward journey. I'm already gone. Come quickly. I'm already fighting. Come quickly. I'm already dead. Come quickly. I'm already dead. Come quickly. This was the hometown song of the desolate man's tribe that had been passed down for thousands of years. After thousands of years of wind and snow, they finally left the cold region of the far north, the hot sea and the snowfield, and returned to their homeland. However, what greeted them was not flowers and enthusiasm, but cold eyes, bloody fights, and the tragic fate of the extinction of their entire clan. In the past, when the desolate man sang this song, there would be a solemn and stirring emotion, or even a solemn but not sad calmness. However, today, tens of thousands of desolate man soldiers were either dead or injured. They sat on the field with pools of blood, and their voices were hoarse or hoarse. The singing could not be orderly, rising and falling from time to time, making it seem especially sorrowful and soaring into the sky. Suddenly, there was the sound of horses' hooves, followed by the sound of wheels. The sound of wheels blended into the sad song of the desolate man. The rhythm of the song was not disrupted. The desolate man's song had no rhythm at this time. Instead, it was given a certain rhythm, a calm, stable, and indifferent rhythm. Clouds covered the northern sky of the field, and a black horse carriage slowly came under the clouds. The desolate man looked at the horse carriage and helped each other to stand up with difficulty. Whether it was the gray-haired old soldiers, the green-faced young soldiers, the middle-aged men with broken legs, or the blood-covered women, they all looked at the black horse carriage with awe and fear. Then, there was their last hope. Their proud knees landed on the blood-soaked field. Wherever the black horse carriage passed, the desolate man knelt down and kowtowed. Some of the seriously injured desolate man soldiers could no longer stand up once they knelt down, and died. Tang knelt on one knee in the middle of the battlefield in the wilderness. His left knee sank deep into the mud, squeezing out a lot of black liquid. It was unknown whether it was the blood of the wilderness or the blood of his fellow tribesmen. He stared silently at the huge, sacred chariot in the distance, and at the looming tall figure in the tower. He slowly adjusted his breath. The desolate man was facing extinction. As the world wayfarer of the devil's doctrine and the leader of the desolate man, He was unwilling to accept this fact. At least before he died, he wanted the West Hill Divine Palace to pay a painful price. In the wilderness at this time, the most honorable and important person to the Central Plains countries was naturally the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace in the huge sacred chariot. He was the ultimate goal of Tang's life. At this moment, he heard the slightly disorderly singing of his tribesmen coming from afar. Then, he heard the sound of hooves and wheels. He looked back and saw the black horse carriage. The surface of the black horse carriage was covered with a thin layer of frost, and the inside of the carriage was covered with a thick layer of ice. The talisman fire in the brass basin was frozen like a ghost fire by the cold, and could be extinguished at any time. The cold aura in Song Song's body had long been awakened, and now it finally began to erupt. However, neither she nor Ning Ke knew what the imprint of Yama in her body would eventually evolve into. Ning Ke's eyelashes were covered with frost, and the dim light coming in through the window was refracted into colorful light by the frost. He listened to the song of the desolate man outside the window and said, "I'll go first, and then you." Sang Sang nodded and put her face on his chest. She said, "I'll die first and then you." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I'll die first and then you. Or we'll die together." When the black horse carriage appeared in the wilderness, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army fell into silence. The armies that were gathering became a little chaotic, and the powerful cultivators with terrifying states were silent. 2 years ago, when the Lank Temple's light of Buddha shone brightly, the entire human world had been chasing after the black horse carriage. The extremely tragic war on the wasteland had all been caused by the black horse carriage. However, the black horse carriage had finally appeared in front of everyone today, and everyone felt a little helpless. No one gave any orders. The tall figure on the giant chariot looked up in silence. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army almost subconsciously stopped attacking, and waited for the final military order. The black horse carriage stopped in front of the desolate man. There was a soft creak, and the snow on the carriage shook and peeled off. The carriage door opened, and Sang Sang, who was wearing a black fur coat, walked out. She looked at the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army in the south, and took a few steps forward. Every time she took a step, the place where her feet touched the ground of the wilderness would be frozen, forming a ball of ice and snow. It was as if she was walking on a white snow lotus. Dark clouds covered most of the sky in the wilderness. More than a dozen black crows flew and circled above Song Song's head. The scene was extremely strange. Looking at this scene, everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army in the south felt extremely strange. It was a combination of negative emotions of fear, awe, disgust, and destruction. In the blood-red chariot, Yi Hongyu rested her chin on her hand and looked at the north quietly. She looked a little tired. Unlike the ordinary soldiers, she was not shocked by the black horse carriage and the daughter of Yama. She was just confused at this moment. Where was Ning Ke? Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Her black hair, which was like a waterfall, fluttered behind her. Without hesitation, she bent her waist and fell down like a tree that had been cut down along with her wildly dancing black hair. Ning Ke was not by Song Song's side, nor was he in the black horse carriage. No one knew when he had left the horse carriage. Under the cover of the Desolate's song, he came to the front of the Desolate's battle line, and came to the Desolate who were kneeling on the ground in reverence. When the whole world's attention was attracted by Sang Sang, he knelt on the ground on one knee and pulled the string with his right hand. The iron bow suddenly bent, and he aimed in the direction of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army a few miles away in the south. The primordial 13 arrows were a combination of the collective wisdom of the Academy and the resources of the entire Tang Empire. In terms of power, it could even be compared with the legendary previous generation's magic weapons. The primordial 13 arrows could ignore space. No matter how far it flew, its power would not be reduced. Therefore, in a battle, the further away from the enemy, the better it was for Ning Quebec. because it was difficult for the enemy to predict from his movements and eyes, and they would not be alerted. Because of these characteristics, the primordial 13 arrows were the most suitable weapon for sneak attacks on the battlefield. It could be said that they were always successful. The only limitation was whether Ning Ke could see and aim at the target. At this time, the two armies were separated by a few miles. Ordinary arrows and flying swords could not fly over, but Ning Ke could clearly see all the details of the battle line that stretched for more than 20 miles, and he could aim at whoever he wanted. Shing, shing, shing. Ning Ke knelt on one knee and hid among the desolate. He moved continuously and shot 5 arrows at lightning speed. He knew that there were not many opportunities left for him today. He had to seize and make full use of this opportunity, which meant that he had to kill enough targets in the first attack. The first arrow was the most unexpected and the most difficult to guard against. It had the highest chance of success. Of course, the target chosen was the most important person, the one who could most likely cause a fundamental change in the battle. This target was easy to choose. Just as Tang decided to kill that person at the cost of his life, Ning Ke did not hesitate to choose to shoot the first arrow at the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. Everything was as Ning Ke had expected. The battlefield was far away, different from the battles in the Lank Temple and Chaoyang City with the primordial 13 arrows. No one could predict his actions in advance. At least when the first sound of the string reverberated in the wilderness, no one knew that the iron arrow had left the string. The primordial 13 arrows ignored time and space, so logically, no one could avoid it. Not even the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. A white turbulence suddenly appeared behind the string. Before it was completely formed, the dark iron arrow had already disappeared. In the next moment, it appeared on the huge divine chariot in the south, in the pavilion behind thousands of layers of gauze curtains, and shot the head of the tall figure. The gauze curtains covered the clear light. The iron arrow shot the head of the figure, but it seemed as if it had shot a real shadow. It silently passed through, and then the iron arrow itself appeared. It passed through countless layers of curtains and disappeared in the distant sky in the south. The tall figure leaned forward slightly and looked toward the north of the wilderness. It seemed that he was not hurt, but rather found it very interesting. He wanted to see what the person who shot the arrow looked like. Today is the first chapter, and there are 3 more chapters to go. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 670. Ning Ke did not feel frustrated when the first arrow that seemed to be about to succeed failed. He looked calm as if he had already expected it. The white turbulence around the bowstring did not dissipate, and the next 4 arrows shot out like lightning. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace was not that easy to deal with. If he was killed by 1 arrow on the battlefield, then the legends in the West Hill scriptures would become a joke. According to the rules of the battlefield, Ning Ke should not waste the precious opportunity of the first arrow on the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace since he was not confident. However, today's battlefield was different from ordinary ones. If he could not kill the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, then no matter how many people he killed, he would not be able to change the current situation. Moreover, no one could resist the strong temptation of shooting the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace to death. He would not give up without trying. Ning Ke's choice of target order was very normal. The stronger or more threatening the person, the higher he would choose. The first arrow was shot at the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, and the second was naturally Yi Hongyu. In the blood-red divine chariot, Yi Hongyu's black hair was like an arrow, and her body was like a broken arrow. She bent backward and fell. At this time, the iron arrow had arrived. With a whistle, the divine chariot's curtain was blown into countless pieces. Several strands of black hair fell, and a stream of blood flowed down from her forehead. Yi Hongyu lay on the floor of the divine chariot, and her blood-red divine robe of judgment spread out like the sunset clouds. It should have been a beautiful scene, but she looked extremely embarrassed. No matter how pathetic she was, she still managed to survive. However, when she thought about the iron arrow that was so close to her forehead and how close she was to death, even she turned pale. Ninkei's third arrow was shot at the great divine priest of Revelation. The great divine priest of Revelation had previously fought with the desolate man's psyche and won. He had also paid a great price, and was now meditating in the divine chariot, trying to recover as soon as possible. At this time, the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace finally had time to react. The tall figure in the huge divine chariot suddenly straightened his back, and a thunderous roar rang through the wilderness. A thunderous sound exploded in front of the great divine priest of Revelation's divine chariot. It looked like a lightning bolt, and countless extremely thin white electric threads kept rolling, as if they could devour everything that entered the lightning ball. The iron arrow shot into the ball of lightning and gradually peeled off. Then, it became thinner, but in the end it wasn't completely swallowed. It turned into a slender shadow that broke through the lightning and shot into the divine carriage. The iron arrow was weakened by the West Hill Divine Palace's hierarch, Lei Tuan, and its power was greatly reduced. The great divine priest of Revelation stretched out his right hand and gently caught the iron arrow in front of his face. His movement was very gentle, like using chopsticks to pick up vegetables, or like using noodles to touch the sun. However, his expression was not relaxed. The deep wrinkles on his face deepened again, and the corners of his eyes began to bleed. Finally, even the wrinkles began to bleed. Only then did the iron arrow between his fingers calm down. The great divine priest of Revelation's meditation recovery was forcibly interrupted by the primordial 13 arrows. After being seriously injured, he would not be able to fight again in a short period of time. He could not participate in today's final battle. Ninkei's third arrow had perfectly achieved his battle intention. But no one would have thought that his third arrow had a more important purpose, which was to cover for the fourth arrow. His fourth arrow was once again shot towards the middle of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's battle line. The arrow cluster was not aimed at the huge divine chariot where the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch was standing, but at Luo Kadi, who was beside it. In Chaoyang City, Luo Kadi had been seriously injured by his arrow and his throat was cut. He did not know how this person survived and could even recover his strength and cultivation. Perhaps the West Hill Divine Palace had some secret divine skill. But he decided that he would not give the West Hill Divine Palace any chance to heal this person today. The West Hill Divine Palace hierarch blocked an arrow for the great divine priest of Revelation and did not have time to care about the arrow that was shot towards Luo Kadi. No matter how strong he was still a human after all, and there were things that he could not do. The iron arrow accurately hit Luo Kadi's throat, like a thread in a young girl's hand passing through the eye of a needle. It was easy, casual, and with a very comfortable pleasure. Blood splattered slightly, and the iron arrow disappeared from the wilderness. The neck bone turned into powder, and the flesh and blood became foam. Luo Kadi's eyes were a little confused. He did not know what had happened. He wanted to look at his throat that had been through many hardships, and was worried that he would never be able to speak again. He lowered his head, and his head fell. His body was as burly as a mountain. His head fell like a stone rolling down from the top of a mountain. It fell to the ground with a muffled thud. The divine guards of the West Hill Divine Palace surrounded Luo Kadi's corpse. Their eyes were filled with intense fear and endless sorrow as they watched their Lord Commander's inexplicable decapitation and death. At this moment, there was suddenly an earth-shattering scream and wail from not far away. They looked back in shock and saw that the South Jin Kingdom's military camp was in chaos. They did not know what had happened. There was a large pool of blood on the ground of the South Jin Kingdom's military camp. In the blood, there were pieces of flesh that had been shaken into pieces, and there was also half a corpse. Looking at the pair of golden silk cloud boots on his feet, he should be a member of the royal family. Several eunuchs and a few masters from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom looked at the pool of flesh with pale faces. They trembled in shock and fear, and one eunuch even fainted from crying. "Your Highness! Your Highness!" A general of the South Jin Kingdom knelt beside the pool of flesh. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with terror. It was as if he was scared out of his wits, and he kept shouting, trying to revive the pool of flesh. If the pool of flesh could not be revived, then the general of the South Jin Kingdom would definitely die. Countless soldiers and eunuchs of the South Jin Kingdom in the wilderness today would become a pool of flesh in the near future. This was Ning Kei's fifth arrow. The crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom, who had led the army on behalf of His Majesty, had died decisively. There was dead silence in the wilderness. No matter if it was the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army or the Desolate Man's tribe, no one spoke during this short period of time. Everyone was so shocked that they could not speak, and some even lost their souls. Seeing that the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was about to win, and as long as they rode forward, they would be able to cut off all the heads of the Desolate Man and exterminate the entire tribe. At this moment, 5 iron arrows flew from the wilderness. 5 arrows shot at 5 people. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the 2 great divine priests of West Hill, the commander of the Divine Hall's Divine Guards, Luo Kadi, and the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom. Any one of them was the most important person in the world, especially the 4 other than Luo Kadi. Whether it was in terms of reputation, power, or actual power, they were all like emperors. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the 2 great divine priests of West Hill were even more godlike. Over the years, who had dared to attack these 5 people at the same time? If anyone had heard of such a situation in the past, they would have thought that the person was not sane. However, the final result of these 5 arrows was that the great divine priest of Revelation was seriously injured and could no longer fight. This meant that he was forced to leave today's battle. The great divine priest of Judgment was extremely disheveled, and only managed to escape with great difficulty. Luo Kadi and the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom died. Ning Kei did not only care about the target's power, but also from a strategic point of view. The key was that he had the ability to carry out such a strategy. Luo Kadi was the most trusted subordinate of the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch. He represented the direct power that was loyal to the hierarch. Such a tragic death would definitely make those powers uneasy, and they might even have other ideas. The South Jin Kingdom Army was one of the main forces of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. They had always been by the hierarch's side. The death of the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom, who was the commander of the army, would definitely bring great chaos to the South Jin Kingdom Army. It would greatly impact the morale of the generals and cavalrymen, and the combat power of the South Jin Kingdom Army would plummet. If his first arrow had really been able to kill the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, even if it was just a serious injury, the direction of today's battle could have been decisively changed because of these 5 iron arrows. Purely from a strategic point of view, the generals of the Tang Empire's Iron Cavalry and the Great River Kingdom's Sage of Calligrapher, who had the highest cultivation state in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, seemed to be more qualified to be the Iron Arrow's targets than Luo Kadi and the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom. However, for some reason, Ning Kei did not choose to do so. Somewhere in the east of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the disciples of the Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden had very complicated expressions on their faces. Zhuo Zhihua looked at her teacher's broad back and wanted to say something, but she did not say anything in the end. The master of calligraphy looked at the north silently and frowned slightly. He and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden had all seen the 5 iron arrows and the terrible damage caused by the iron arrows. Even though he had been in the knowing destiny state for many years, he could not be sure what the result would be if the iron arrows were shot at him. Moreover, no matter how humble he was, he knew that in the current coalition army, He should have a share of the iron arrows no matter what. There was only one reason why Ning Ke did not shoot him. Cat Girl's left shoulder was injured and wrapped in bandages. Her innocent and cute little face was extremely pale. She said with a sobbing tone, "Are we really going to fight with Brother Ning?" In the west of the wilderness, in front of the Tang army, General Xian Zhilong, who had taken over Xiaoho's position for 2 years, looked at the desolate man's tribe in the north that was almost completely dead. He wanted to find Ning Ke's figure, but he could not find him. After a long silence, he suddenly smiled and raised his right hand, signaling the tens of thousands of cavalrymen under his command to line up and wait for orders. A deputy general frowned and asked, "Retreat?" Xian Zhilong shook his head and said with a smile, "How can the Tang Empire retreat alone in front of the whole world? But our men are also tired and need a break." Shooting arrows was a battle, but not shooting was also a battle. It also required more wisdom and accurate judgment of the situation. The Great River Kingdom's reaction and the Tang armies beginning to line up proved that Ning Ke's judgment was not wrong. It was quiet in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army looked nervously to the north, trying to find Ning Quebec. Under the threat of such an iron bow, moving forward became an extremely terrifying thing. However, the northern wilderness was full of desolate men who were either injured or dead. Ning Ke would be hard to find if he sneaked among them. So the problem left for the coalition army was how many arrows did he have left? Or how to find this person? Or how to force this person out? At this moment, a solemn and loud voice came from the huge, sacred sedan. It startled tens of thousands of gauze curtains and shone on the golden railings. It came to the front of the desolate man's army like thunder. "Today, I will send the first 2 chapters. I will go out for dinner and then come back to update the rest. The situation of the monthly votes is very serious. If you still have monthly votes, please vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 671. Many things looked complicated and were also complicated to do. Only a few people had the ability to see the simple core of complicated things and then make a concise and correct response. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace naturally had this ability. He knew that it was not easy to find Ning Ke in the vast wilderness, because human beings were not like goshawks that could fly in the sky and look down on the world, nor could they be like Haotian who could calmly and lovingly see all the details of the world from the 9th heaven. Since it was not easy to find Ning Ke, the easiest way was to let Ning Ke show himself. So he said a sentence to the lonely black horse carriage in the north. "Daughter of Yama, you finally showed up." The hierarch lord's voice was very bright, as if it was painted with gold and as broad as heaven and earth. After it came out from the giant sedan and pavilion, it suddenly condensed and turned into a solid thunder. Wherever the thunder passed, tens of thousands of gauze curtains danced even though there was no wind. The golden railings beside the sedan shone brightly. Several priests spat out blood and fell to the ground dead. A straight invisible airwave appeared in the wilderness, stirring up the bloody soil and countless grass and gravel, attacking the black horse carriage in the north. A figure swept out from the crowd of wilderness and came to Sang Sang as fast as he could. It was Ning Quebec. He took out the big black umbrella from behind and wanted to open it to block the thunderous sound wave for her. The sound wave was too strong, the wind howled, and the thunder rumbled. Before the big black umbrella could be fully opened, Ning Ke was blown to the ground more than 100 feet away. His black academy uniform had many tiny tears, and his tough skin had many cuts, some of which began to bleed. The big black horse looked at the thunder, the sound wave, and the strong wind, and it kicked its hooves in fear. It wanted to turn around and escape, but it could not bear to run away. It bent its front hooves and buried its head in the ground, pretending that nothing had happened. The thunder came to Sang Sang. Sang Sang's face was slightly pale, but her eyes were unusually bright. She did not know how she could withstand the terrible thunder, but she vaguely knew that she should not be afraid of it. The dozen or so black crows circling above her head suddenly swooped down and let out extremely cold, shrill, and unpleasant caws towards the thunderous sound that carried dust and rock. The black crow kept flapping its wings. Every time it flapped its wings, it would create 2 strong gusts of wind that carried the cold aura emitted from Song Song's body towards the south. Countless cold gusts of wind were generated from the bottom of the black crow's wings. They were like countless thin ropes that intertwined and weaved together, eventually turning into an extremely tough and thick rope. The sound of thunder and the cold wind met in front of Sang Sang. The cawing of the black crows became more and more shrill. From time to time, black feathers would fall off, float down, and stick to the ice around Sang Sang, looking like ink spots on white paper. The cold wind gradually subsided. The sound of thunder gradually dispersed. The smoke and dust gradually settled. The dozen or so black crows flew back to Song Song's head and circled around. However, their flying speed was much slower than before, and they seemed to be a little tired. Just like that, the Lord Sect Master's thunderous roar was scattered by a dozen black crows. Ning Ke climbed up from the ground and walked to Song Song's side. His expression was a little complicated, not because his whereabouts had been exposed, but because the encounter between the black crows and the thunderous roar had proved some of his conjectures. Since Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, how could Yama watch his daughter die without doing anything? The people feared Sang Sang because the cold aura in Song Song's body could destroy the human world. Then why did the West Hill Divine Palace send such a large force? Because they were afraid? Why were they afraid? The powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects should be very clear that Song Song's strength was very ordinary. Especially after her serious illness, she became very weak and could be easily killed. Their fear could only mean that after Sang Sang woke up, she had the ability to make them afraid. That was why the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace personally went to the wilderness. It was not hard to imagine that the daughter of Yama had some kind of terrifying ability. It was just that Sang Sang was not able to show it before she woke up. Until her illness became more and more serious, the cold aura in her body became more and more intense. As she woke up day by day, the unknown ability began to return to her body. Ning Ke had clearly realized this when he was in the Ueluan Kingdom, but he did not take advantage of it. Instead, he tried all ways to cure Song Song's illness. He wanted to destroy or suppress and purify the cold aura in her body. Even at the most dangerous moment, he did not want her to show that unknown ability. Just as Sang Sang once said, once Sang Sang really woke up, she would become the daughter of Yama. Would Sang Sang still be the Sang Sang now? Would she still be Sang Sang? You are indeed the daughter of Yama. The hierarch's voice sounded from the sacred sedan again, echoing uneasily in the wilderness. But this time, he sounded a little tired. It seemed that the thunderous roar had consumed a lot of his psyche power. Just as he finished speaking, the tall figure behind the tens of thousands of gauze curtains suddenly became even taller. Unknowingly, a divine staff that was even taller than the figure appeared in the hands of the figure. Looking at the changes behind the giant sedan curtains, Ning Ke's mood suddenly became cold. He did not know what would happen next, but he had a feeling that what was about to happen was very scary. The tens of thousands of gauze curtains on the giant sedan suddenly burned. It was not a real burning, but countless rays of light and heat flowed through the thin cracks of the curtains like flowing water. The tall figure behind the curtains also began to burn. Countless rays of light and heat spread out from the edges of the figure. The remaining green grass beside the sedan instantly turned yellow and then black. Dozens of red-robed priests and divine guards beside the giant sedan dragged the bodies of the priests and Luo Kadi away as fast as they could, avoiding the terrifying rays of light and heat. Then, they knelt down in front of the giant sedan. The light was the holy radiance, and the heat was the absolute heat. Countless rays of light and heat emerged from the hierarch's body. His figure seemed to have become lamp oil. He held the long divine staff in his hands, like the wick of an oil lamp. Light and heat were burning. The burning of the lamp oil was transmitted to the burning of the wick, and it became a specific flame. The flame was a pillar of light. A holy pillar of light emerged from the top of the divine staff, penetrating the top of the giant sedan and shining into the sky. The southern sky was not covered by dark clouds. It was blue and boundless, with a few white clouds floating above. When the pillar of light fell on the sky, the blue sky became bright in an instant. A few white clouds floating in the sky covered the light in the sky, and the edges seemed to be plated with a golden edge. Endless pressure descended from the sky and fell on the wilderness. There was only one color left in the blue sky and white clouds, or rather, there was no color at all. There was only light. Absolute light was a very monotonous visual perception. At this moment, the hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness looked up at the bright sky, but they felt that they had seen an infinitely rich world. That world was not a real divine kingdom, but a spiritual perception. The infinite richness they saw was not a specific object, but a projection of countless human emotions under the power of Haotian. The scene at this moment had already surpassed all the imagination of the world of cultivation, and the imagination of cultivators of the highest state. This was no longer a divine skill, but more like a miracle. The hundreds of thousands of people of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army knelt on the slightly cold ground of the wilderness and worshipped the bright sky. They worshipped the scene that only appeared in the mythological scriptures. The expressions on their faces were shock, awe, excitement, and fear. Then, they all turned into absolute devotion and fanaticism. Previously, they had been frightened and panicked by the appearance of the daughter of Yama and Ning Kei's 5 arrows. But now, they had once again strengthened their faith and gained endless courage. Correspondingly, when the blue sky and white clouds turned into light, the mood of the desolate man's tribe was extremely low. The soldiers who were seriously injured and on the verge of death looked at the southern sky with despair on their faces. No one sang anymore. Even Tang's expression became a little bleak. Is this the legendary Tianqi? Ning Kei looked at the giant chariot under the light pillar and the tall figure in the chariot and asked. No, Master's Tianqi was not like this back then. Sang Sang said and then coughed painfully. Much of the light from the southern sky fell on the vicinity of the desolate man's tribe. Naturally, it also fell on her. A few wisps of extremely faint white smoke came out of her black fur coat. It looked like her body was burning, but there was no smell of burning. She looked at the light in the southern sky with a timid look in her eyes. Ning Kei looked at her tightly furrowed brows and felt a little sad. He reached out and wanted to hold her in his arms. But the moment his fingers touched her body, there was suddenly a piece of ice on his fingernails. An intense pain spread from his fingertips to his sense of perception. Ning Kei groaned and found that in a moment, his entire right hand was frozen, and the ice was spreading to his arm. The cold aura in Sang Sang's body had completely awakened and was releasing it. Ning Kei should let go at this moment, but he did not want to. The great spirit in his body quickly turned into Haotian's divine light, and instantly melted the ice on his arm. Then he held Sang Sang in his arms. Sang Sang's hair flew across his face, and instantly there was a line of snow. His lips were covered with frost, and his voice was trembling and unclear. If it's too painful, don't do it. The light from the southern sky fell on Sang Sang, burning her body, heart, and soul. The cold aura in her body kept freezing her body, heart, and soul. This process was very painful. Ning Kei hugged her tightly. The frost on his body was shattered and melted by the great spirit in his body, and then condensed again. He was also in pain, but he knew that she was in more pain. Sang Sang's body trembled violently, and she seemed to be in great pain. She curled up in Ning Kei's arms to hide, just like in the past years, trying to find safety and warmth there. However, the light was everywhere, and she had nowhere to hide. The cold aura was in her body, and she could not hide. She could only continue to suffer between the heat and the bitter cold. One more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 672. Sang Sang cried out. Her tears slid down her dark face and fell on Ning Kei's body. The black cloth suddenly hardened and fell on the ground, turning into ice beads. Each ice bead was crystal clear, round, and exactly the same size. A series of extremely fine shattering sounds rang out from within her body. It was as if her bones were being crushed into countless fragments, or as if her flesh and blood were being decomposed. It was even more like a hard piece of ice being continuously compressed. The cold aura in her body was finally released completely. With her body as the center, a dark ball spread in all directions. Ning Kei, who was holding her, was instantly hit and sent flying dozens of feet away. Wherever the aura reached, the field was frozen, the grass was covered with frost, and there was no sign of life at all. Ning Kei fell heavily on the ground and spat out blood. The blood froze instantly, and it was not until the third mouthful of blood that it began to emit hot air. He was sent flying by the cold aura, but the big black umbrella remained where it was, right under Sang Sang's feet. Sang Sang squatted down, picked up the big black umbrella, and opened it. The cold aura continued to be released from her body to the wilderness. After the invisible aura met with the real nature, it turned into a cold black cyclone, rolling up the gravel on the ground and whirling around her body. It looked like a black cloud of dust. Since landing in the small courtyard in Chaoyang City of the Yueluan Kingdom, the black crows had been following Sang Sang, circling and dancing in the sky above her head. At this time, when Sang Sang changed, more than a dozen black crows seemed to sense something. They cawed and flew away, flapping their black wings to fly higher into the sky, as if they wanted to get as far away from her as possible. Finally, they all flew into the dark clouds. The cloud had been following Sang Sang for a longer time, and it had never left the western wilderness. It became thicker and thicker, and it became difficult for the light to penetrate and refract. Gradually, it became dark clouds, but the clouds themselves should be white. After flying into the clouds, the dozen black crows became small black spots, as if someone had dripped a few drops of thick ink into the water urn. The color of the clouds gradually became darker and darker. On the ground of the wilderness, the black smoke and dust were still swirling around Sang Sang's body. The chilly aura followed the big black umbrella in her hand and rose high into the sky. If the divine scepter in the West Hill Divine Palace's hierarch's hand was the wick, turning the light and heat released by the divine skill into real burning flames and lighting up the southern sky, then the big black umbrella in Sang Sang's hand was like a writing brush dipped in the cold aura in her body and dyed the northern clouds black. The dozen or so black crows were just drops of ink before the brush was drawn. The real black came from Sang Sang herself. The dark clouds rolled violently and then suddenly became still, calmly accepting the cold aura coming from the big black umbrella on the ground. It became darker and darker at a speed visible to the naked eye, more and more like a piece of paper covered with ink, until it finally became a solidified ink. There was nothing but black. What is black? Darkness means that there is no light. At this moment, the northern sky of the wilderness was completely dark. Apart from the lack of stars, it looked like night. The night will not appear in the day, there will be stars in the night sky. In that case, the starless night that appeared during the day was naturally not an ordinary night. Perhaps it would have another name. What's going on? Why is it dark over there? Is this the everlasting night? The people on the ground of the wilderness looked at the sky that was separated by light and darkness. They didn't exclaim or scream, they just muttered to themselves. The shock they received was so great that they had even forgotten the feelings of shock and fear. Their expressions were numb and confused, as if they had lost their souls. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army stood under the bright southern sky and looked at the night in the north. After a long time, the people finally woke up and began to exclaim, scream, and cry. Some people tried to escape, but all the war horses were frightened and collapsed on the ground. It was chaos. The desolates stood under the dark northern sky and looked at the light in the south. Everyone knelt down again and put their hands on their chests. They closed their eyes and prayed calmly and devoutly, waiting for the arrival of Yama. Ning-Kei struggled to get up and walk towards Sang-Sang again. Before he decided to leave the desolate man's tribe and go south, he knew that something might happen to Sang-Sang. It might even be something more terrible than death, because she would wake up and be seen by Yama. He did not care about the underworld invasion or the everlasting night. He only cared about Sang-Sang now. Sang-Sang was fine now. The rays of light from the bright southern sky could no longer fall on her body. Every time those strands of blazing light shone a few feet in front of her, they would be strangled by the dark, cold aura. And the cold aura in her body could no longer bring her any pain. Sang-Sang was not well now. She looked at the south. Although it was very far away, she could now see clearly what was happening in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. She could even see all the details, including the expression on everyone's face. She saw that those people's faces were filled with fear, uneasiness, cowardice, hatred, sadness, and all sorts of negative emotions, but she did not see love on their faces. No one in the world would like her now. Sang-Sang looked down at the tips of her shoes and the two blooming ice lotuses under her feet. She said in a low voice, "Before my teacher died, he kept looking at the north. Only now do I understand that what he saw at that time was me now. Turns out that at that time, he had already determined that I was the dark shadow." Ning-Kei walked behind her and reached out to hold her hand. Sang-Sang stepped on the lotus made of ice and snow, her feet touching the ground. Her body seemed to be weightless at this time, just a transparent and intangible existence. Ning-Kei asked, "How do you feel now?" Sang-Sang whispered, "I feel like I'm very strong." Ning-Kei asked, "Do you like it?" Sang-Sang shook her head and said, "No." Ning-Kei said, "Bear with it." Sang-Sang said, "I can't help it." Ning-Kei asked, "Why not?" Sang-Sang looked up at the south and said, "Because no one will like me anymore." Ning-Kei said, "Be more promising. At least be sober." Sang-Sang asked, "What do you mean by sober?" Ning-Kei said, "You are so ugly and bad-tempered. No one in the world likes you except me. Even if no one likes you now, as long as I still like you, there is no difference from before." Sang-Sang thought about it and said, "That seems to make sense. Half light, half dark. Quite a few people have written about it before. The one that left the deepest impression on me was the part in The Smoking Man's Blasphemy. It was extremely shocking. The part about The Night Will Come was, of course, influenced by it, including the relationship between the Great Prophecy and the Buddha's words. However, the part about The Night Will Come, in terms of its origin and meaning, is something completely different. It can even be said that, well, I can't spoil it. I can only say that I write sitcoms, okay? This chapter is only 2,000 words, and I'm really tired. I'll write a separate chapter and go to sleep. See you guys tomorrow, or a separate chapter later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 673. Endless darkness and coldness poured into the sky from the big black umbrella and dyed the northern sky of the wilderness black, as if the night had come. Endless light and heat poured into the sky from the top of the scepter and dyed the southern sky of the wilderness bright, as if the divine kingdom had come to the human world. In the blood-colored chariot, Yi Hongyu looked at the sky that had been cut into two different halves. There was no expression on her beautiful face. Then she wiped the blood from her forehead and looked at Sang-Sang in the north. Sang-Sang was the daughter of Yama. Anything that happened to her could be imagined. Although Yi Hongyu was shocked, she did not pay much attention to it. Her eyes finally fell on the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace a few miles to the east. her brows slightly furrowed, because she could not clearly see whether that holy pillar of light came from the Lord Hierarch's body and fell into the sky, or whether it fell from the sky and landed on his body. In the meadow dozens of miles to the south of the wilderness, dozens of riders were looking at the northern sky. The silver mask reflected the strange and frightening sky. Light and darkness met in his eyes. The color of his eyes became darker and darker, and his emotions became extremely complicated. No one knew what he was thinking. Now he did not care about light or darkness. He was just jealous that the little girl holding the big black umbrella had attracted everyone's attention. Even Ning Ke had become the center of the world at this time. It should be me standing there, Prince Longqing thought. Then he remembered that after he escaped from the Jisho Abbey 2 years ago, he thought that he was the son of Yama, so he became even more jealous. In Helan City, the Tang Emperor looked at the sky in silence. The arrival of the night indicated the invasion of the underworld, but it did not make the most powerful monarch in the human world feel any fear. On the contrary, his eyes became clearer and clearer as the light and darkness in the sky shone, and he looked a little excited. Master Huang Yang stood beside the emperor and bowed to the light and darkness in the sky with his palms pressed together. His lips moved slightly, but no one knew what he was saying. At the back of the mountain of the academy, the wisteria on the steep-roofed corridor was blooming. The walls of the small building were covered with green vines. There was no one in the dark cliff cave. Everyone was on the edge of the cliff. Eldest brother and all the younger brothers and sisters stood on the edge of the cliff and silently looked at the sky in the north that was divided by darkness and light. The magnificent Chang'an city was shrouded in golden light. "We should be there now," second senior brother said. Eldest brother said, "Even if we are there, we can't do anything." Second brother said, "But at least we are there." Eldest brother said, "Teacher doesn't agree with us being there, so we can only watch from here." In the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, it was quiet in the dark cave. Spring had dyed the forest behind the mountain green, but it had no effect on the cliff cave. The pond in front of the hut was still cold. The sword saint, Lu Bai, sat cross-legged beside the pond. He lowered his head and did not look at the sky. The opening at the top of the cliff cave was too small. Even if he looked up at the clouds, he would only see a patch of light. An ancient sword slowly rose from the bottom of the pond. Compared to this sword, the sword that Lu Bai often used on the straw hut was as broken as a straw. No one knew that the sword saint, Lu Bai, was hiding in the belly of the sword garret. He had been meditating by the pool for many years. Other than the fear in his heart that he did not dare to show himself, he had been cultivating a real sword. It must be the strongest sword in the world. The sky shrouded the earth and could be seen by everyone. Therefore, everyone in the world could see the sky that was separated by light and darkness. However, because of the perspective, the further south one looked, the more light they could see, and the smaller the dark sky. At the extreme south, the dark sky above the wilderness became a smear of black on the ground. It looked like a flattened dark passage. If that dark passage connected the underworld and the human world, then what would come out of that passage in the next moment? The army of the underworld or the body of Yama? In the depths of the South Sea in the extreme south, tides rose and fell. Huge waves shook the reef, and underwater volcanoes spewed lava continuously, evaporating the seawater. White fog shrouded the island. On the black reef at the edge of the island stood a Taoist in indigo. He looked at the dark sky in the far north and raised his eyebrows slightly. He said, "The sunset sands will open in reverse tomorrow?" After saying this, he was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, "It's still not right." The Buddhism sect did not participate in the holy war in the wilderness. As Master Lotus said to Ning Ke, and the headmaster of the academy and many others later said, the final way of the Buddhism sect was to close their eyes, not see and not speak. Because of the Buddha's last words, the monks of the Buddhism sect tried to kill the daughter of Yama and save the world from great terror. However, because of the essence of the Dharma passed down by the Buddha, when the daughter of Yama was not killed, the underworld invasion could not be stopped, the everlasting night was coming, and the human world was about to enter the Dharma-ending age. The monks of the Buddhism sect stopped trying to do anything but hide and hide. In the depths of the western wilderness, the huge and deep giant sinkhole was surrounded by clouds and mist. Neither the holy light nor the dark shadows could penetrate the clouds and fall on people. Tens of thousands of dark-skinned believers and slaves knelt at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, kowtowing and praying to the huge mountain in the center of the giant sinkhole. Their faces were full of piety and fear. All the monks of the Xiankong temple had hidden in the yellow temples among the mountains. Faint chanting came from different temples, and then gradually flowed down like water, as if to cover the whole mountain. Master Chi Mei, the president of the Hall of Venerable, stood in front of an ancient bell outside a temple. When his left hand, which only had 2 fingers left, fell on the face of the bell, he tapped it from time to time to help the chanting to spread further. Looking at the distant sky in the east, watching the scene of the confrontation between light and darkness, he looked a little anxious. The perseverance and calmness of the past had disappeared. The Dharma-ending age predicted by the Buddha was finally coming. However, too many celestial devices left by the Buddha had been lost. The cleansing bell was destroyed and the chessboard was missing. Could the Xiankong temple still avoid the eyes of Yama? A calm and indifferent voice sounded in front of Chi Mei. When the dark night comes, all Dharma collapses. It is a great horror. However, Haotian overlooks the world and will never allow such a tragedy to happen. Now that the light has come, the dark night may not necessarily win. Disciples of the Buddha should pray sincerely. Chi Mei accepted the teaching seriously. His fingers left the face of the bell, and he sat cross-legged in front of the temple. He looked to the east, put his palms together, and prayed sincerely and quietly. Buddha is merciful, and the common people should be blessed by the Buddha. The sound of prayers gradually came from the countless yellow temples among the mountains. Gods and Buddhas bless us. Akalanatha bless us. Light, the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple, did not chant, nor did he pray. He held his staff and stood at the top of the mountain. He looked at the parallel wilderness, the distant light and darkness, and he looked extremely tired. The night gradually expanded and slowly invaded the south. Countless fine cracks appeared on the edge of the bright sky like a spider web. Then the cracks were instantly poured into the darkness and turned black. When the darkness and the light met, there was no sound. But everyone on the ground of the wilderness felt their hearts beat faster, and then they felt an extreme pain. People looked at the bright sky being eroded by the darkness inch by inch. The pain in their hearts became more and more severe. They covered their chests, but they did not know whether the pain came from their bodies or their souls. The black cracks on the edge of the bright sky gradually became thicker, until finally the cracks became lines, and then pieces, and then they merged together. That was a new night. If this situation continued, the night would become stronger and the light would become weaker. After a moment or hundreds of years, the whole world would be covered by the dark night. The people living on this land and the beasts in the mountains would never be able to see the light again. Endless fear occupied the hearts of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Even the people in the Desolate Man's tribe instinctively felt fear when they saw this shocking scene. In the pavilion of the Divine Chariot, the tall figure of the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch suddenly knelt down. His right hand was still tightly holding the divine staff. His calm but thunderous prayer sounded in the wilderness. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the West Hill Divine Palace knelt down and began to pray with the hierarch Lord. Even the Tang army knelt down because they were also believers of Haotian. They were also afraid of the coming of the everlasting night. Hundreds of thousands of people prayed in unison. At the beginning, their voices were a little messy. Then they gradually became more and more orderly, powerful, and shocking. People prayed for the miracle of Haotian, for the strength of the light, and for the darkness to recede. The sky in the south of the wilderness suddenly became brighter, as if countless amounts of light were injected into the firmament. The silent and slow night gradually stopped. A shrill crow's cry sounded in the night. The ink-like night began to roll and roll, as if there was a consciousness there that felt that it was being desecrated and began to become angry and violent. The snow lotus under Song Song's feet had already bloomed. She closed her eyes and tightly held the big black umbrella in her hand. The cold aura kept gushing out of her body, rolling up the aura of heaven and earth in the wilderness. It turned into a gloomy black color and kept pouring into the night. Ning Ke stood not far from her and looked at her silently. The light and the darkness were fighting with the firmament as the battlefield. This kind of fight between light and darkness was actually the fight between existence and non-existence. It was far beyond the level of human beings and was not something he could influence. At this time, the cold aura in Song Song's body had all awakened. Even if a piece of snow fell on her, it would be shattered into the smallest structure. So he could not hold her hand anymore. His hand was bleeding. The drops of blood fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. He could do nothing at this time. It was meaningless to do anything. So he could only look at her quietly. Suddenly, he felt that everything he saw was a little familiar. He looked to the south and found that the battlefield in the wilderness was full of corpses. He looked to the sky, which was bright like a round of sun. And the night was sweeping away. Ning Ke was sure that he had seen these scenes before. Reporting to everyone, I have some personal matters to deal with today, so I might only write this chapter. I'm sorry, I'll write 4 chapters tomorrow. The last chapter will really be the climax. I'm really looking forward to it, but I'm also really nervous because I'm not confident in my ability. I'm afraid that I won't be able to write the feeling that I should have. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 674. Where did I see you? Ning Ke looked at the sky and the wilderness, at the boundary between light and darkness, and at the countless corpses lying on the ground. He remembered that it was a dream. A few years ago, when he was traveling from the city of Wei to Chang'an, he had a discussion and study with Liu Qinchen about cultivation. It was also on that night that he had a dream. When he went to bed that night, he held Song Song's slightly cold feet. He did not know if it was because of this, but the beginning of the dream was very strange. He dreamed of a sea, on which there were endless white flowers or lotus flowers. When the white flowers dispersed, there was green seawater, and deep under the sea was a thick world of blood. In the world of blood, there were countless sad and fearless faces without facial features. He was terrified in the dream, and then he came to the real world, the wilderness. There were countless corpses lying around him. They were the Tang cavalry, Yueluan warriors, South Jin Kingdom crossbowmen, and many grassland barbarians. Blood flowed from the bodies of these soldiers, and the entire wilderness was dyed red. 3 black clouds of smoke floated steadily in front of the wilderness, looking at where he was standing indifferently, as if they were alive. Countless people in the wilderness looked up at the sky in horror. Ning Ke followed them and saw a scorching sun in the sky. The sunlight was dim, and it seemed that night was coming. A patch of darkness spread from the horizon. Sang Sang stood on the snow lotus, holding a black chess piece in her palm. She looked at the terrified West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army opposite her, and the cold aura continued to gush out from her body, as if it would never stop. The night sky gradually darkened, and the light in the south gradually dimmed. The spring wilderness became colder and colder, and the corpses lying in the pool of blood in the wilderness gradually froze. Looking at the increasingly familiar scene in front of him, Ning Ke's body became a little cold. He was more and more sure that what he saw in the dream during the journey was what happened today, except for some minor differences. For example, in the dream, he did not see the corpses of the desolate men, but there was a scorching sun in that dream. Then Ning-Ke remembered that he had entered a dream between the last giant rock when he tried to climb the mountain on the second floor of the academy a few years ago. In that dream, he also came to the wilderness. Along with countless people, he looked up at the sky. Boundless darkness was approaching from the sky, and despair and fear were written on everyone's faces. In that dream, he said certain things to certain people. The scene in the dream had left a deep impression in Ning-Ke's memory and made him inexplicably afraid. He did not even tell Sang-Sang about it. He regarded it as his biggest secret and subconsciously did not want to remember it. Until today, those dark and gloomy dreams had become reality. Ning-Ke looked at Sang-Sang and the swirling black aura around her. His body trembled slightly. It was not until this moment that he realized that the signs in the dream were none other than Sang-Sang. He had always been with Sang-Sang in this life, so those dreams had always accompanied him. When he first had this dark dream in the carriage, he was hugging Sang-Sang's feet to sleep. Now that he thought about it, that night was probably the first day Sang-Sang woke up. In that dark dream, he had seen 3 streaks of black smoke. At this moment, Sang-Sang should be one of them. Where were the other 2 terrifying black smoke? Ning-Ke looked around and did not see any black smoke. He pondered for a long time until the night sky gradually forced the light in the south to retreat, but he still could not come up with an answer. Suddenly, he turned around and saw that the big black horse had bent its front hooves and was squatting in front of the black carriage like a dog. It looked up at the battle between light and darkness in the sky, looking very afraid. At this moment, Sang-Sang stood in front of the desolate man's tribe, facing the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. She was very lonely. There were only him and the big black horse beside her. The cold black aura that spewed out from her body swept the grass and gravel on the ground of the wilderness, enveloping him and the big black horse. Ning-Ke's body stiffened slightly. He realized that the other 2 black smoke were himself and the black carriage. In that dream, he stood in the direction of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army and looked to the north. He saw 3 black clouds of dust. Now in reality, he was standing in the north and was part of the 3 black clouds of dust. The 3 black smoke that brought fear and despair to the entire world was him. But in that dream, he was standing in the south. Why was he here in reality? When did he change sides, from light to darkness, and when did he make the choice? When he was a child, when he waved the hatchet at the housekeeper in the woodshed, had he already made the choice? When he climbed the mountain on the second floor of the academy, he once again waved the knife in the illusion and killed the housekeeper and young master. Then, he walked towards the opposite darkness. Had he already made the choice? When he found out that Sang-Sang was the daughter of Yama in the Lank Temple, he walked into the light of Buddha without hesitation and opened the big black umbrella. He fled in the wilderness and waved the knife at the innocent people in Chaoyang City. In the dream, he had made the choice. In reality, he had made the same choice. Ning-Ke remembered that this dark dream had happened once before. That was in Chang'an City. He had just learned cultivation and could feel the chi of heaven and earth in the world. He was so touched that his eyes were slightly wet, and then he had a good sleep with Sang-Sang in his arms. Every time there was a big change in life, there would be a dream. In that sweet sleep, there was also a dark dream. In that dream, darkness gradually occupied the sky above the wilderness, and the pure night covered the sky. Seeing that the eternal night was coming, and when the cold defeated the light and heat, there was a sudden thunder in the sky. The thunder rumbled and instantly spread throughout the entire world. Many people in the wilderness were struck by this thunder and fell to the ground, moaning in pain. Those who could still stand were like statues, looking up at the sky in a daze. At the place where the thunder sounded, the holy light instantly lit up the entire night sky. High up in the sky, in the brightest place in the center of the holy light adventure, a huge golden door slowly opened. One could vaguely see the head of a huge golden dragon slowly poking out. Yes, if the dream represented the reality that was going to happen, and it was a sign of the war between light and darkness, then the darkness that Sang Sang brought to the world would not be so easy to win. The light in the sky in the south had dimmed, and the huge and terrifying golden dragon head had not yet appeared. A great fear occupied Ning Kei's body and mind. He looked at the sky in shock, and looked at the darkened sky in the south. He thought to himself, will I really see that scene later? The dark night came from the north, oppressing the light in the south and making it dimmer. It was eroding the kingdom of light inch by inch. The white clouds that had been swallowed by the light reappeared. The edge of the white clouds suddenly brightened, and it was even brighter than when the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's divine scepter emitted a beam of light. It did not seem to be gilded, and was completely burning. It looked like a scorching sun, hiding very close behind the white clouds. A thunder rumbled in the sky. There was a loud bang. The heavenly thunder fell on the wilderness, and the blood that had congealed in the soil was all shaken out. It bounced up to the height of one's knees, and then fell down, as if it was raining blood from heaven. The corpses of the desolate soldiers and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army that had fallen on the wilderness also leaped up, as if they had been resurrected for a moment, and then fell heavily to the ground, making horrible sounds of bones breaking and flesh breaking. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness felt a sharp pain in their eardrums at the same time, and their knees went weak as they fell to the ground. More than 1,000 people who were closest to the center of the battlefield were directly shaken to death. This was the real sound of thunder, the sound of the heavenly thunder. Compared to the thunder that came from the sky, the whistling sounds of swords, arrows, crashing sounds, and screams from the bloody battle in the wilderness were all so weak. The wind and thunder that Yi Su had attracted with his wooden sword when he chased after Tang were like firecrackers for children in the face of the heavenly thunder. They were not worth mentioning at all, and were so laughable in comparison. In the eyes of heaven, everything in the world was so laughable. The thunder sounded in the sky, rising behind the clouds. The white cloud became brighter and brighter. Not only the edge, but even the thick center seemed to be burning, radiating light and heat to the ground. People knelt on the ground of the wilderness and looked up in astonishment. They could not see the real picture behind the clouds, and did not know what had happened or what would happen. Only Ning Kei vaguely understood what was happening behind the clouds. He had a dream, and these things had appeared in that dark dream. The sound of thunder was the sound of the door opening. At this time, an extremely heavy and huge golden door was slowly opening behind the clouds. Behind the golden door was Haotian's divine kingdom of light. Ning Kei felt cold all over, and then he began to tremble like an ice sculpture, constantly shaking off ice chip. His body and soul were occupied by endless fear. In this wilderness, only he knew what was going to happen, and only he knew the truth. That was why he was lonely, and then more afraid, until he fell into despair. He looked at Sang Sang and shouted desperately, but his voice could not be heard in the increasingly bright light. Sang Sang still did not hear him. He ran to the black horse carriage as fast as he could, pulled the big black horse, and drove to Sang Sang, trying to escape with Sang Sang. However, at this moment, the white cloud in the southern sky suddenly darkened. It was not the white cloud that darkened, but something appeared from behind the clouds, and suddenly suppressed all the light in the wilderness, because that thing was extremely bright. A huge golden dragon head peeked out from the clouds, looking down at the wilderness indifferently. Chapter 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 675. The golden dragon's head was huge. It was high up in the sky, but it seemed to appear in front of everyone. All the details could be seen clearly. The scales were like mirrors, and the dragon horns were like volcanoes. It had a specific shape, but it was hard to describe. It was pure gold, but also transparent. It gave off endless light and heat, sprinkling on the ground of the wilderness. With the appearance of the golden dragon's head, the southern sky suddenly lit up and returned to its previous state. Then, in an instant, it was tens of thousands of times more light and heat than the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch's divine scepter. The dark night in the northern sky seemed to feel the power of the new light and suddenly became stagnant. The golden dragon's head slowly turned, and its two bright eyes swept over the humans on the wasteland with an ancient sense of stillness. Its expression was indifferent as it released a terrifying pressure. There were records about dragons in the West Hill Divine Palace's teachings, stories about dragons in the Buddhist scriptures, and legends about dragons in the human world. However, no one had ever seen a dragon with their own eyes, let alone a giant golden dragon. Such a mythical creature had actually come to the human world. The humans on the wilderness went crazy. Especially the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Seeing that darkness was about to defeat light and that Yama was about to appear, they suddenly saw the giant golden dragon that represented light. They were so excited that tears streamed down their cheeks. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed. More people looked at the sky in a daze, as if they had lost their minds. The golden dragon's head released infinite light. Light represented warmth and love. However, light sometimes meant punishment when people dared to look directly at the light. In the next moment, the humans on the wilderness cried out in pain. They covered their eyes and knelt on the ground, no longer daring to look at the sky. However, the light from the golden dragon's head was so tempting that some devout believers of Haotian fearlessly looked in that direction with tears streaming down their cheeks. Under the endless light, the tears on the believers' faces evaporated instantly. The liquid in their eyes also evaporated, turning into two wisps of green smoke and disappearing without a trace. They became blind just like that. Because of those dreams, Ning Ke had foreseen the appearance of the golden dragon's head. That was why he did not look up at the sky. He tore off the cloth and wrapped the big black horse's eyes. He pulled the black carriage to Song Song's side. Song Song's eyes were tightly shut and her face was abnormally pale. The black smoke around her was being purified at a speed visible to the naked eye under the illumination of the golden dragon head. Her body trembled violently in the cold aura that was gradually fading away. She seemed to be in extreme pain. The desolate men once again fell into despair and endless fear. How could they, the people of the mortal world, resist the divine punishment from Haotian? The desolate fell into despair and endless fear again. How could they resist? Tang did not look directly at the sky. The light and pressure emitted by the huge golden dragon head was not a power that could be resisted by the mortal world. However, he did not kneel because he was the last world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He represented the spirit of the Devil's Doctrine, and what the Devil's Doctrine wanted to resist was Haotian's rule over the world. There were also a few leaders of the desolate who cultivated in the Devil's Doctrine's technique. They forced themselves to stand up despite their serious injuries and looked straight at the wilderness that was shrouded in light. They tottered but refused to kneel down. The light from the sky grew brighter and heavier. The bodies of Tang and the leaders of the desolate warriors cracked. It was the desolate's hard bones fighting against Haotian's power. Sensing that there was actually an insignificant human in the wasteland who dared to defy its majesty, the golden dragon's head in the sky slowly turned and indifferently looked in that direction, letting out a dragon roar. The dragon's roar was low and deep, and when it landed on the wasteland, it was like a hurricane. In the wind, there seemed to be countless priests praying, countless knights roaring, and countless lights appearing. The grass on the wilderness that was drenched by the blood instantly turned black. The blood instantly evaporated into a fishy smell of steam. The few desolate man leaders groaned in pain and fell down one after another. There was a crisp sound. Tang's left thigh bone was broken. He let out an angry and unwilling roar and fell backward. Even though he spat out blood, he did not kneel. The golden dragon came from Haotian's divine kingdom. It represented Haotian's power and released Haotian's will to the mortal world. It was a miracle and a punishment. The power of its roar was irresistible. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness knelt down to show their respect and submission. In the West Hill Divine Palace, through the countless curtains, the tall figure in the giant chariot could be seen to have knelt down. The hierarch lord's hand that was holding the divine staff was trembling. No one knew if it was because of fear or something else. In another divine chariot, the great divine priest of revelation had also knelt down. He looked very calm. The deep wrinkles on his face reflected the light coming through the curtains. It was as if he was smeared with gold powder. In the blood-colored divine chariot, the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hong Yu, also knelt down to show her respect to the golden dragon's head in the sky. She had maintained this posture since the moment the golden dragon's head descended to the mortal world. Only she knew that her knees had never touched the ground. It was not until the golden dragon let out that roar and Haotian's power swept across the wilderness that her knees were forced to touch the ground. Tang and several leaders of the Desolate spat out blood and fell to the ground. Her face suddenly turned pale. Blood seeped from her knees and the corner of her lips. The golden dragon's head scattered infinite light onto the surface of the wilderness. In a short period of time, it purified the dark aura around Sang Sang. The rays of light that contained absolute light and heat fell directly on Sang Sang's body. Countless wisps of green smoke came out of her body. In the light, Sang Sang appeared to be in extreme pain. She held her chest and coughed non-stop. What she coughed out was not blood, nor was it a cold aura. Instead, it was something black and transparent like ice. The black transparent ice was coughed out from her lips and fell on the ground of the wilderness. It made a heavy impact and created a deep pit before disappearing. At this moment, the dragon's roar from the golden dragon's head had also reached her. The black ice was completely crushed into the tiniest gravel. Her body suddenly twisted as if it was about to break. Ning Ke had already pushed his speed to the maximum. However, it was impossible for him to be faster than the speed of light and the speed of the dragon's roar. Just as his fingers touched Sang Sang's body, Haotian's power spread to his body. With a thud, he knelt on the ground beside Sang Sang. His knees hit the ground hard and seemed to shatter instantly. The intense pain was clearly transmitted to his sense of perception. It caused his face to turn pale and he was abnormally terrified. No one in the world could resist the roar of the golden dragon. In front of Haotian, he was already so weak. In that case, what was the meaning of the choices he had made all these years? The battle between light and darkness was about to end. Sang Sang was about to die. What could he do? What could he change? If he could not change anything, then why did he have those dreams? Why could he see the future and the present in his dreams? Ning Ke put his hands on the ground and used all his strength to squat up. Then, he stomped his feet back and changed from a kneeling position to a sitting position. He stood up under the pressure of the light, his expression extremely painful. Such a simple action almost squeezed out all his courage and strength. He reached out his trembling hands and took out a pair of glasses made of black crystal. He put it on the bridge of his nose. His face was abnormally pale. After putting on the sunglasses, it became even paler. The sunglasses corresponded to the darkness. The world in his eyes also became very dark. The blood and corpses in the wilderness had already occupied most of the light and heat in the sky. At this moment, in his eyes, it became much dimmer and colder. It was even more similar to what he had seen in his dark dreams. Ning Ke raised his head and looked directly at the golden dragon's head in the sky. The huge golden dragon's head almost occupied his entire field of vision, so it was very easy to aim. Although he had sunglasses on, the light still pierced his eyes and made them unbearably painful. Unknowingly, tears flowed down his face. The iron bow was slowly pulled, making a creaking sound. The dark iron arrow trembled slightly on the string. The sharp arrowhead faced the light from the sky and seemed a little dim, as if it was afraid. There was no fear on Ning Kei's face, only determination. He looked at the golden dragon's head in the black glasses and roared. He loosened the string and released the arrow, aiming directly at the golden dragon's right eye. The mythical creature represented Haotian and descended to the human world. The people living in the human world either knelt on the ground to show their reverence, surrender, or remained silent like a stone. However, no one would ever think of killing it, because it was impossible. But Ning Kei did it. The white turbulence had just blossomed behind the bowstring when it was purified into nothingness by the infinite light that descended from the sky. However, the iron arrow had already left the bowstring. In a split second, it had already reached a very high place in the sky. At this moment, everyone in the wilderness was kneeling on the ground. No one dared to look directly at the sky or the golden dragon's head in the sky. So no one saw this scene that had rarely happened in thousands of years. The golden dragon's head was extremely high up in the sky. In the human world, other than Liu Bai's sword, probably only Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows could touch its territory. The dark iron arrow turned into an extremely thin black shadow in the thousands of rays of light. It accurately hit the golden dragon's left eye and was instantly purified by the light. If the giant golden dragon's eyes were like a calm lake, then the primordial 13 arrows, which made the cultivation world tremble, were like a thin piece of ice thrown into a lake. They disappeared instantly and did not cause any ripples at all. Ning Kei was not surprised by the result of this arrow. However, the word despair did not exist in his dictionary. He would not give up until the very end. Since he was going to die, he would not be satisfied if he did not shoot this arrow. The giant golden dragon looked down at the ground of the wilderness and at Ning Kei, who was holding the bow. A hint of mockery and contempt appeared in its huge lake of light eyes. Then, it returned to absolute indifference and exhaled a dragon's breath. The dragon's head exhaled, and the golden light condensed into billions of grains of sand that fell on the wilderness like a river of sand. However, every grain of sand was absolutely transparent and contained infinite power. Chapter 2. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 676. As the dragon's breath descended, a holy, pure, and majestic aura reverberated across the wilderness. The bowstring in Ning Kei's hand snapped. With this sound, his sense of perception was in chaos. The ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body seemed to show signs of collapsing. What was more frightening was that the drop of liquid formed by the Great Spirit in his lower abdomen seemed to have sensed the call of the dragon's breath. It spun violently and released countless threads of air that poured into every part of his body. If that was all, it would not be a big deal. The problem was that the Great Spirit that poured into every part of his body showed signs of penetrating through his skin and leaving his body. In the sky, the golden dragon's head slowly moved forward, and its slender body finally poked out of the burning white cloud. Its scales were as fine as brocade and as bright as mirrors, and they rubbed against the clouds and the air, producing golden sparks. As the giant golden dragon gradually revealed its full form, the pressure that enveloped the entire wilderness became heavier and more terrifying. Even the space of the wilderness itself began to become unstable. The dragon's breath that fell on the wilderness was formed by tens of thousands of tiny golden gravel. Strangely, these golden gravel, which contained infinite pressure, did not ignite into a blazing divine light after falling on the ground. Instead, they danced in the wind like real sand. Just because it did not burn did not mean that it did not have any power. The golden sand-like dragon's breath fell on the wilderness and landed on the corpses of countless desolate man-soldiers. Suddenly, many tiny cracks appeared on the corpses of the desolate man-soldiers that had been sleeping for a long time. Dozens of golden sand grains of dragon's breath landed on Tang's body. His animal skin clothes instantly tore apart, and dozens of tiny bloody holes appeared on his rock-hard body. Ning Kei's situation was not much better. He waved his hand in an attempt to drive away the floating sand grains of Dragon's breath. Unexpectedly, the golden sand grains did not have any force and stuck to the edge of his palm. An extremely thin bloody hole suddenly appeared on the edge of his palm. The majestic Great Spirit in his body dispersed out of his body through the bloody hole and instantly disappeared into the air. Ning Kei understood what was going on. He cultivated in the Great Spirit and had long become a demon. Tang and the Desolate Man also cultivated in the Devil's Doctrine. They had their own worlds in their bodies and stored a lot of qi of heaven and earth. According to Haotian Taoism, the reason why the Devil's Doctrine was called the Devil's Doctrine was not only because the demonic cultivators created their own world, which was a great disrespect to Haotian. The most fundamental reason was that the demonic cultivators would constantly absorb the qi of heaven and earth from nature. If this situation continued, the qi of heaven and earth would eventually dry up. The giant golden dragon represented the will of Haotian. In its eyes, Ning Kei and the Desolate Man were like shameless thieves who had stolen Haotian's wealth. Of course, it had to take back the wealth from these thieves. The dragon's breath, which was like golden sand, floated in the wilderness and fell on Ning Kei and the others. It wanted to take away the qi of heaven and earth in their bodies and purify it into the original light of the world. This process was the divine punishment of Haotian. This was the so-called redemption. In the distant Helan city, His Majesty looked at the shining sky and the golden dragon's head. He was silent and his expression was very solemn. The golden dragon's head spewed dragon's breath toward the ground of the wilderness. It was like a golden sand falling like a rainstorm. Looking at this picture, His Majesty's face suddenly turned pale and he seemed to be in extreme pain. Master Huang Yang's expression was very serious. His right wrist reached out from his sleeve and held His Majesty's left hand. A string of sandalwood prayer beads slid across his wrist like flowing water and was put on His Majesty's wrist. When the prayer beads were put on His Majesty's wrist, a merciful Buddhist aura was born. His Majesty felt that the aura in his body that had been tormenting him for many years had calmed down a little. However, Master Huang Yang could not rest assured. He did not dare to let His Majesty's temper go. He let His Majesty stand on the city tower to watch the battle and forcibly helped him into the thick stone city tower. In the innermost room of the stone city tower, the Empress was holding the young prince. Her face was very pale and there were still traces of blood at the corner of her mouth. The young prince cried and said to the Emperor, "Father, please take a look at Mother. What happened?" The Empress looked at the Emperor with a gentle smile and shook her head, indicating that she was fine. The Emperor walked to her, took off the prayer beads on his left wrist without hesitation and put them on her wrist. Master Huang Yang looked at this scene and sighed in his heart. Deep in the wilderness of the far west, all the monks of Xiankong Temple had taken refuge in the yellow temples of various sizes. The whole mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist. Only the faint sound of scriptures could be heard, but the specific scene could not be seen. Only a small part of the highest peak of the giant mountain could see the scene in the distance above the clouds and mist. The sky in the east was getting brighter and brighter. The chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple was holding a silver staff and looking to the east. His eyes had long been dried up by the light. No moisture could be found in his eyes, but he was not hurt. The light in the east was getting brighter, and the dark night was illuminated. Even though it did not disappear, it had been completely covered. There was no joy on the face of the chief monk, only fatigue and solemnity. Haotian descended and the giant golden dragon appeared. The light shone on the world. Except for a few people, no one in the world could look up at the sky. Light was not only warmth, but also majesty. It did not need intimacy, but reverence. Therefore, light allowed humans to know of its existence, but not to see it. In the sacred sedan on the wilderness, Yi Hongyu tried to look up at the giant golden dragon in the sky. She instantly burst into tears, and the divine starlight at the bottom of her eyes dissipated. She had to lower her head expressionlessly again. Not being able to look up at the sky did not mean that she could not know about the divine war in the sky. Countless cities, towns, mountains, rivers, villages, and people knelt under the light. They looked at the projection on the ground and nervously watched the trend of the war between light and darkness. Countless believers of Haotian gathered in the nearest Taoist temple and kept chanting and praying. They blessed the allied forces on the wilderness and showed their piety to Haotian. They were crazy with joy and sorrow. As the light gradually overwhelmed the darkness, the people's happy cries rose to the sky. Many people fainted from the excitement, and some never woke up again. They returned to the divine kingdom of Haotian. In the deep mountains of West Hill, there was a very simple Taoist temple. This Taoist temple was probably the least known by Haotian believers, but it was the most important Taoist temple in Haotian Taoism. Behind this Taoist temple, there was a red mountain covered with green vines. There were countless deep caves on the mountain, and many powerful Haotian Taoism cultivators lived in these caves. Those powerful auras seeped out from the green mountains and watched the changes in the sky. They enjoyed the light from the giant golden dragon and gradually became restless. Occasionally, a low and happy laughter could be heard. The dragon's breath was the dragon's breath. After the exhale, it was inhalation. The huge golden dragon head high up in the sky opened its mouth, and its body suddenly thickened. A huge gust of wind suddenly blew up on the ground of the wilderness, whistling and spiraling, sweeping up the golden sand grains that were scattered on the ground. Looking from afar, there seemed to be a whirlwind between heaven and earth. The thin end was at the golden dragon's head, and the thick end was on the ground. It kept sweeping, and wherever it passed, sand and stones flew. As the golden sand left the ground, the aura of heaven and earth in the corpses of the desolate warriors on the ground was also sucked away by the tornado. The process could not be seen with the naked eye, but Ning Ke could feel it, because a lot of the great spirit in his body was sucked away by the giant golden dragon. At this moment, when he looked up again, the golden dragon's head and the sunglasses no longer had a sense of majesty and light. It looked bloody, terrifying, and greedy. The dark night in the north had slowly receded, and the big black umbrella no longer breathed out. Song Song's connection with the night had been cut off, and the aura around her had long been purified. Dust and gravel kept dancing in the air. Song Song's feet left the ground, left the white lotus-like ice, and floated into the air. The giant golden dragon looked at her indifferently. Song Song's clothes fluttered in the whirlwind. Sang Sang flew into the sky, towards the giant golden dragon's mouth. Sang Sang turned back and looked at Ning Quebec. Her eyes were terrified, and her expression was helpless. Ning Ke jumped up and hugged her legs, trying to pull her back to the ground. But he could not do it. Sang Sang was still flying up into the sky, taking him with her. Haotian wanted Sang Sang. Haotian did not want him. That was why Song Song's body was very light, but his body suddenly became as heavy as a mountain. With two cracking sounds, his arms that were holding Sang Sang were completely broken. But he still did not let go. Since he had grabbed hold of her, he would never let go. Even if his arms were broken, he would not let go. Even if he died, he would not let go. An extremely faint golden light swept past his eyelashes. The earth seemed to no longer have any attraction. Ning Ke carried Sang Sang and flew into the sky, following the dragon's breath, towards the giant golden dragon's mouth. Their hair and clothes fluttered in the air, looking like two black flowers. Under the pressure of the light, he started to bleed non-stop. Blood dripped from the black petals and fell on the wasteland. On the ground of the wilderness, the big black horse dragged the carriage and ran desperately. It seemed to have forgotten its fear and chased after the two people in the sky, neighing angrily and sorrowfully from time to time. Ning Ke looked at it and said in a hoarse voice, What an idiot! Then he looked up and saw that the sky above him was full of light. There was nothing but light. It seemed so pure as death. So he knew that death was coming. He had made many choices in his life. Now it seemed that those choices were really meaningless. Just like at the last moment, he chose to jump into the sky and hug Sang Sang. But sometimes the choice itself was very meaningful. He looked at Sang Sang and smiled. Sang Sang looked at him and smiled. At this moment their figures suddenly stopped, no longer flying towards the sky, towards the light. Because a hand reached out to the sky and grabbed Ning Kei's leg. This is the 3rd chapter. The 4th chapter will definitely be updated after dinner. See you then. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 677. Ning Kei flew toward the light with Sang Sang in his arms. They had been flying for a long time, and the people on the ground of the wilderness had almost become black dot. The big black horse was almost out of sight. They were very far from the ground. Logically speaking, nothing could fly here except for flying swords or arrows. It was impossible for someone to reach into the sky and grab his feet, unless that person was very tall. Ning Kei and Sang Sang passed through the golden dragon's breath and landed gently on the ground of the wilderness. He held Sang Sang in his arms and looked up. He found that the figure in front of him was indeed very tall. The man looked at Ning Kei and Sang Sang with his back to the sky and the giant golden dragon. His face was shrouded in darkness and could not be seen clearly. The edge of his body seemed to be plated with a golden light and seemed to be burning. The man stood on the ground of the wilderness, and his tall figure seemed to touch the sky. The man said with a smile, "The choice itself is not necessarily meaningful. But sometimes our choices can affect the choices of others. That will make things interesting." Ning Kei had a conversation with a tall man in the illusion of climbing the mountain on the 2nd floor of the academy. At that time, he did not see the man's face clearly. "Between light and darkness, which side will you choose?" "Why should I choose? How did you choose before?" "My body is in the darkness, but my heart is in the light. I did not expect to see a wild grass swaying in the wind on the wall after so many years. You see, I said it was not a must to choose. But what if the sky falls? How can the sky fall? What if? Naturally, there will be someone tall enough to handle it, for example, you." After climbing the mountain in the academy, Ning Kei found out who the tall man was. Many years later, in the wilderness where the dream became reality, he found that what he said was so accurate. Even if the sky falls, so what? There would always be someone taller, for example, someone as tall as the teacher. Ning Kei knelt in front of the tall figure and said respectfully, "Headmaster, you are here. Well, after thinking about it, I still can't figure it out, so I came." The headmaster looked up at the bright light in the sky and the fading night. He left a shade on the wilderness with his body, covering Ning Kei and Sang Sang. His black cloak fluttered in the wind as if it was about to burn. "I've thought about it for more than 1,000 years. Which side should I stand on in the war between light and darkness? The problem is that I've never seen Yama and I have no friendship with him. I don't like the cold. I don't like the quiet and boring world that Buddha saw. I don't like Haotian either. I even hate it." The headmaster said, "That's why I've always wanted to be an opportunist. All these years, I have been asking you which way you will go, but in fact, I am also asking myself which way I should go. That year, when I asked you in my dream, you said that you also wanted to be a fence-sitter, which really comforted me. It turns out that not choosing is more important. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to be a fence-sitter. A gust of wind can recognize the sturdy grass, but it can also break the sturdy grass." Ning Kei looked at the headmaster and said worriedly, "But you still made a choice." The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and said calmly, "Maybe my choice will eventually be proven wrong. But at least for now I want to choose this way, so I will choose this way." Ning-Ke didn't know what to say. He was very touched and inexplicably sad. He was happy that he had his headmaster and that he and Sang-Sang were still alive. But he began to worry about how the headmaster would face the anger of Haotian. The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He continued, "Not choosing is indeed a kind of freedom. But if you don't dare to choose because you are timid, then it is not freedom. Making a choice may not necessarily be meaningful, but it may be meaningful. The reason we live in the human world is not to have meaning, but to have fun." The words in this passage were simple, but they carried a deep meaning. Ning-Ke didn't need to think much to understand what the headmaster wanted to say. Because he was a student of the academy, meaning was the goal and meaning was the process. The academy didn't care about the goal, only the process. Back then, youngest uncle held a sword and wanted to fight with heaven. It was probably because he thought it was very interesting. The power of light suppressed the human world. Countless people knelt on the ground, not daring to look directly at the sky. They prayed silently in awe. Anyone who dared to stand had died or was about to die. However, in the brightest place in the wilderness, there stood a tall man, using his figure to protect the daughter of Yama. This was a challenge to the dignity of Haotian's divine kingdom. It was an unforgivable blasphemy. The giant golden dragon's calm and indifferent eyes burned with fury. A distant and solemn dragon roar reverberated through the heavens and earth once again, followed by a terrifyingly powerful dragon breath. Countless blazing divine halos mixed with crystal-clear golden sand shot out from the dragon's head high up in the sky and attacked the ground of the wilderness. The power contained in this dragon's breath was even greater than before. Wherever it passed, the air began to burn. A golden and white shadow appeared on the surface of the wilderness. Ning-Ke looked over the headmaster's shoulder and saw the strange and shocking scene in the sky. He looked at the endless dragon breath with fire and light, and his expression changed slightly. He shouted, "Be careful, headmaster!" The headmaster did not turn around. His back was still facing the sky. The golden sand fell from the sky and came behind him. Then, it disappeared without a trace. The light and heat between the golden sand disappeared as well, as if nothing had happened. There seemed to be a lake behind the headmaster, a hot lake that was about to erupt. There was a sea, the hot sea before the cold region of the far north froze. The dragon breath was like countless ice cubes that were thrown into the hot sea and melted instantly. All the golden dragon breath that attacked the headmaster was turned into the finest particles of the world by an invisible force. They melted into this world. This was purification. This scene looked simple, but it was very strange. No one could understand that the dragon breath, which was the purest Haotian divine light and could purify everything in the world, could be purified. Even cultivators who surpassed the 5 states could create their own rules in Haotian's world and have their own world. However, they could not ignore Haotian's rules in Haotian's world. How did the headmaster do it? The people on the wilderness were all kneeling. No one dared to look up at the bright sky, but they could see what was happening on the wilderness. They saw the headmaster appear, saw the giant golden dragon spit dragon's breath at the headmaster, and saw the terrifying dragon's breath that no human could resist disappear. Looking at this scene, everyone was shocked to the extreme, to the point that they were unwilling to believe their own eyes, and those who firmly believed that they were not mistaken began to doubt this world. The hierarch of the divine hall held the divine staff in his hand and knelt on the ground. His figure was still tall, but at this moment, his figure trembled violently. Compared to the tall figure in the wilderness, he seemed so small, so weak, and so lowly. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the scene in the wilderness. The deep wrinkles on his face were twisted in shock. The blood and golden powder in his eyes were peeling off. He murmured, "What state is this?" The dragon breath was futile and was even purified. The giant golden dragon's eyes revealed extremely complicated emotions. The dragon's body suddenly tightened. This time, it was no longer a distant and majestic dragon roar, but a violent and angry dragon roar. A strong hurricane roared in the wilderness. Countless black soil and grass were swept up. Smoke and dust filled the air and gradually obscured one's vision. It seemed to be darker than the previous night in the north. The giant golden dragon roared and angrily and laboriously squeezed its body out of the clouds. A golden rope dozens of feet thick was tied to the dragon's body. The golden rope was extremely tight, as if it was dragging a heavy object. After a while, a chariot made of pure gold, pulled by the giant golden dragon, gradually drove out of the clouds and appeared in the sky of the human world. The golden chariot was extremely huge. If it landed on the ground, the entire Chang'an would not be able to contain it. The gold was not the gold of the human world. It was so pure and transparent, and its entire body was bright. The sky was bright, and the smoke and dust on the wilderness suddenly disappeared. It was as white as snow that had fallen for dozens of days. The space began to shake, and the earth began to shake. A divine general stood on the golden chariot. This divine general wore armor condensed from Haotian's divine flame. He was extremely tall, like a mountain. Compared to him, the stone statue of Buddha that once stood on Tile Mountain was like a small stone man. This divine general's face was extremely perfect. He had a natural grace and no flaws could be found. Compared to him, Prince Long Qing, who was once known as the West Hill handsome son of God, was like a beggar. This divine general's expression was extremely cold. His eyes emitted a blazing white divine light. He was completely emotionless. He stood in the chariot and looked down at the human world. Wherever his eyes touched, nothingness would disappear. Other than the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, the Taoist in Indigo on the South Sea, and a few people in the anthill behind the Jishou Abbey, no one in the human world could see the golden chariot and the divine general on it. Ning Ke sat in the figure of the headmaster with Sang Sang in his arms. He wore a pair of sunglasses. Although his eyes were stinging, he still opened his eyes wide to look at the scene in the sky. He was shocked, speechless. He knew that the headmaster was very powerful. However, facing the anger of Haotian's divine kingdom, facing a divine general who was as tall as a mountain, and whose eyes were filled with Haotian's divine light, even the headmaster could not deal with it. The headmaster turned to look at the golden chariot that was being pulled by the giant golden dragon. He looked at the perfect divine general of light on the chariot and the perfect face of the divine general. He suddenly shook his head. There is nothing perfect in the world. There are only things that we think are perfect. The headmaster put his hands behind his back and looked at the divine general of light in the sky. He said, "Your perfection comes from thousands of old friends. Therefore, you are not a human, and you are not those old friends." The divine general of light was indifferent. He ordered the giant golden dragon to pull the golden chariot down from the sky. A light sword that was more than 10 miles long appeared in his hand. He slashed at the wilderness. You come from Haotian's divine kingdom and use the divine sword of light. If you only use light, you will lack truth, just like your existence. Today, I will show you the sword of the human world. The headmaster said. He stretched out his right hand in the air and opened it, facing the south of the human world. The clouds broke and the sky darkened. A sword came from thousands of miles away from the south. The sword was ancient and hot. It broke through the clouds and landed in the headmaster's broad palm. It hummed slightly, showing its submission and awe, as well as the pride of being controlled by the headmaster. This is the 4th chapter. Damn it, I have to write another chapter. While it is interesting, I will try to come out before 10:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 678. In the past few decades, the headmaster had never fought. He was gradually forgotten by the people. Even the people in the cultivation world would occasionally forget about his existence. In the legends that only a few people knew, the headmaster's weapon was a stick. Ning Ke had painfully confirmed that the headmaster's weapon was indeed a stick. The headmaster did not use a sword. Since he wanted to let the divine general of light in the sky see the sword of the human world, he could only borrow a sword. He reached out to the south and a sword flew towards him. The ancient sword came from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. The sage of sword, Lu Bai, sat cross-legged by the lake. He looked at the dried water in front of him and thought of the ancient sword that flew out of the lake. He was silent and had a complicated expression on his face. Lu Bai was very weak and tired. He had meditated by the lake for many years to cultivate a real sword. That sword contained all of his sword style and spirit. In other words, that sword was himself. That was why it was the strongest sword in the world. Now that the ancient sword left the lake, his sword style and spirit left with it. Naturally, he was weak. However, there was no anger on Lu Bai's face. Instead, he looked confused. He was the most powerful person in the world. His swordsmanship was unparalleled, but someone could take his sword from thousands of miles away. He did not even have the right to object, let alone stop it. After a while, Lu Bai's confused expression turned into slight excitement. He had already sensed whose hands the sword had fallen into. He felt honored and proud just like the sword. The ancient sword came from thousands of miles away and landed in the hands of the headmaster. The headmaster's feet left the ground of the wilderness and floated up into the sky. His black robe whistled in the wind and reflected the light in the sky. It turned the holy and hot Haotian divine light into countless pieces of gold. Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms and looked at the sky. His face was full of shock. The headmaster finally made his move. He danced in the sky. In his opinion, this battle was destined to be recorded in history and even become a legend. It was bound to be magical and dangerous. It might even last for 3 days and 3 nights or even years. He only hoped that the headmaster could win and be safe. What he didn't expect was that this battle was completely different from what he had imagined. It started quickly and ended quickly as well. It was very simple. The headmaster's black robe fluttered in the wind. He was already above the blue sky. He looked at the light and darkness in the sky and casually waved the ancient human sword in his hand. A sword mark suddenly appeared between the extremely brilliant light and the gradually declining veil of night. The sword mark was extremely deep to the point it seemed as if it wanted to pierce through the sky, and it was like a deep trench that separated light and darkness. The headmaster's first sword, heaven-cleaving. The divine general of light stood on the golden chariot, his face emotionless. The light sword in his hand, which was more than 10 miles long, slashed at the ground of the wilderness. The blade, which was dozens of feet wide, pressed down on the headmaster's body like a mountain. Compared to the giant golden dragon, the golden chariot, and the divine warrior of light in the sky, the headmaster, who was especially tall among mortals, looked like a speck of dust floating in the air. Compared to the terrifyingly huge sword of light, the human sword in his hand was like a tiny hair. The headmaster raised the sword of the world in his hand and faced the light sword. When the sword of the world and the light sword touched, it was like a tiny hair that lightly brushed on Tianqi Mountain. The tiny hair was unscathed, but the mountain collapsed. The light sword suddenly shattered like an avalanche, scattering in all directions of the wasteland. The sword style in the headmaster's hand did not stop, as if it would never stop. It pierced through the hundreds of thousands of light sword fragments and attacked the golden chariot, landing on the face of the divine general of light. There was an extremely tiny sword mark on the divine general of light's perfect face, so it was no longer perfect. The emotionless and emotionless face became somewhat comical because it was no longer perfect. Crack, 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 crack. A series of extremely subtle sounds rang out. There were hundreds of thousands of cracks on the face of the divine general of light. Those cracks spread to his majestic body, and the armor that was formed by Haotian's divine light also began to crack. The divine general of light was like an ice sculpture, instantly shattering into countless transparent crystals. They rustled and fell to the ground of the wilderness. It was like a hail, but the sound was more like a rainstorm hitting the eaves. Those fine transparent crystals still contained the terrifying divine light and divine power, but they could no longer combine into one and pose any threat to the headmaster who was holding the sword of the world. The fragments of the divine general of light and the light sword continuously fell on the ground of the wilderness, like a dense meteorite rain. They fell with fiery tails, splashing smoke and igniting countless blazing flames. On the wilderness, countless people rolled in pain in the divine light and then died, turning into green smoke and nothingness. The divine general of light, who was looking down on the world indifferently a moment ago, also turned into green smoke and died. The headmaster's second stroke, God slaying. The headmaster flew against the wind and went straight to the place where the light was the brightest. He stood on the head of the giant golden dragon. The giant golden dragon roared angrily and swung its tail. The clouds scattered and thunder roared. The headmaster still stood on its head, his black cloak fluttering in the strong wind. The giant golden dragon turned back to bite, and the headmaster's sword fell. It was unknown whether the headmaster had become extremely tall or the giant golden dragon had shrunk under his feet. The sword of the world in his hand pierced the giant golden dragon's neck and went extremely deep. The giant golden dragon screamed and struggled with all its might. The headmaster's sword moved around the dragon's neck, and pieces of dragon scales fell off. The giant golden dragon was in more pain and struggled more intensely. It flew and rolled in the sky at high speed. Clouds and lightning formed around its body, but it could not get rid of the sword of the world no matter what. Countless dragon scales fell off. They floated in the sky above the wilderness like countless mirrors of light. They fell to the ground and reflected the light in the sky, turning the whole world into a river that could not calm down under the twilight. Every time a dragon's scale fell, a ball of heavenly fire would ignite in the wilderness. Countless people screamed and rolled in the heavenly fire. Then, the clouds died and turned into green smoke. The sword of the world circled the dragon's neck. The giant golden dragon's head and body separated. The huge dragon head and the dragon body that had been winding in the sky suddenly froze and floated in the air. Then, like a golden river of sand, it fell to the world. The headmaster's third stroke, dragon slaying. The headmaster waved his sleeves and his black cloak rose with the wind. His left sleeve waved the giant golden dragon's body into the night in the north. The disintegrating golden sand danced wildly in the night and then exploded continuously. Every grain of golden sand contained the purest and most terrifying Hautian divine light. Now that it was completely burned, it produced an unknown amount of light and heat. The night in the north was suddenly purified. His right sleeve compressed the giant golden dragon's head into a ball of pure light. He pressed his palm into the top of Song Song's head. The remaining cold aura in Song Song's body suddenly disappeared like ice and snow meeting the sun. Deep in the South Sea, the seawater in front of the Black Reef kept rolling because of the burning magma. It spewed white steam into the sky. It looked very uneasy, just like the Taoist in Indigo. He looked at the north of this flat world, at the incessant flashes of lightning and the incessant rumbling of thunder. After a long period of silence, he sighed and shook his head. Deep in the west wilderness, the chanting in the clouds was slightly chaotic because of the strange phenomenon. The yellow temples that were used to being quiet did not seem to know what to express. It was just like the chief preaching monk's mood at the moment. He looked at the lightning above the eastern wilderness. His tired face looked even more tired. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead. The lightning gradually stopped, but the sweat on his forehead increased. The green mountain behind the Jisho Abbey was silent. It was full of silence and despair. An old and shrill voice cried, "We still can't kill him. What can we do?" The divine guard of light and the giant golden dragon's scales fell from the sky and turned into Hautian divine fire. It engulfed the humans on the ground of the wilderness and burned many people to death in a very short time. Before a battle of this level, all the powers in the world could only watch from the sidelines. But today, no one was qualified to watch. They could only be affected and die regardless of who they were. Whether it was the desolate or the people from the Central Plains, the West Hill Divine Palace or the Devil's Doctrine, as long as they were touched by the heavenly fire, they would instantly turn into charred corpses and be purified into smoke. The headmaster landed on the ground of the wilderness. He waved his hand and clouds gathered. His sleeves moved and the wind blew. He looked and it rained. In an instant, the rain fell on the wilderness, extinguishing the heavenly fire and collecting the smoke. The rain and wind stopped. The sky that had been divided by light and darkness returned to normal, revealing a blue sky. White clouds floated in the blue sky and cloud-like flocks of sheep appeared in the distance. The sunset sands will open in reverse tomorrow? It's still not right. The headmaster looked at the blue sky and white clouds and shook his head. He casually threw the sword in his hand to the south. Then he put his hands behind his back and led Ninkei and Sang to the black horse carriage. The dazzling light disappeared, and so did the cold night. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness gradually woke up. They saw the tall figure and the black horse carriage that was gradually getting farther away. They vaguely guessed what had happened, but they dared not believe it, because even the most secret scriptures and the most blasphemous dark history books had never recorded such a thing. The war between the divine kingdom and the human world ended with the human world winning. The ancient sword of the human world flew back to the sword Garrett of South Gene Kingdom. It fell from the cave in the mountain and quietly inserted into the bottom of the dry pond. After a while, the water in the pond appeared out of nowhere and drowned the sword. Lu Bai looked at the pond in front of him and knew that he could never use this sword again, even if he had forged it himself and refined it with his spirit for many years. One who had seen the sea could not be water. This sword had been used by the headmaster and fought against the will of Haotian. How would it be willing to be used by a layman and fight in the human world? There was no disappointment on Lu Bai's face, only calmness and respect. He tidied his clothes and washed his face with the pond water. Then he bowed to the northern wilderness. He was the most powerful man in the world, the proud sage of sword Lu Bai. He had never respected or feared anyone. He only bowed to the headmaster. The headmaster of the Tang Academy was a legendary name. Even though this name was gradually forgotten by the world and many cultivators, it was still the most powerful name in the human world in the eyes of the truly powerful cultivators. Many people were guessing how tall the headmaster was. The abbey dean of the Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple had once been defeated by the headmaster. They once thought that they could roughly calculate how tall the headmaster was, but then they realized that they were wrong. Lu Bai guessed that the headmaster of the academy was in the legendary state of tranquility and inaction because he had not been involved in worldly affairs for many years. However, he was shocked to find that he was wrong. At the top of Helan City, Master Huang Yang looked at the blue sky and white clouds in the distance and said with emotion, "In the spring of the 13th year of the Tianqi era, the academy reopened." His Majesty presided over the opening ceremony in the academy while the nation master and I played chess in the separation pavilion by the road. I once asked him how high the headmaster of the academy was. The emperor asked, "How did Qin Shan answer?" The master of nation once said that the headmaster was as tall as a few floors. At that time, I said that the second floor was already very high, and the headmaster of the academy actually had several floors. That was really high. But now it seems that we were wrong. How high is the headmaster? Master Huang Yang sincerely praised. So the headmaster is as high as the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 679. First of all, I didn't update yesterday. Although I would make up for it on the weekend, I didn't manage to complete the promised 4 chapters. So, I had nothing to say. I apologized and worked hard. The reason I want to explain is because some of my friends think that since I asked for leave at 4 p.m. yesterday, and there is still a long time before I go to sleep, if I work hard and work hard enough, I should be able to write something. I want to explain this to them. Indeed, I write novels to earn money. I write business novels. In a sense, I've said in various interviews that inspiration isn't the most important thing when writing a business novel. The most important thing is technique. But after all, writing novels is also a kind of creative work, and it has its own peculiarities. Many times I need to be in a good state of mind to continue writing, especially when I'm writing some important chapters. For example, I took a leave at 4 p.m. yesterday and slept at 11 p.m. yesterday. There was still a long time before I could write. If I worked hard, I should be able to write something. The problem is, I know I can't be in a good state yesterday. So, if I force myself to write something, there will be problems. If it's a normal plot, then it's fine. I'll close my eyes. Good for you, good for me, good for everyone. But for this plot, I have some requirements. I need to write until I'm satisfied. Yesterday's leave had nothing to do with any plot discussion. Although I am easily affected in this aspect, I am more willing to write according to the established plot and prove that I wrote well. I have always been a very consistent person in this aspect. The reason I took a leave was that I was not in a good state and was very tired. To put it simply, if I wrote this plot yesterday, it would definitely be much worse than the 5 chapters one wrote today. I couldn't accept this, so I confirmed that I couldn't write it yesterday. I thought it would be more appropriate to let everyone know in advance, so I took a leave early. Wang Xiaobo said somewhere at the beginning of Red Horsetail Run at night. Every book should be interesting. For some books, being interesting is the reason for its existence. For others, being interesting is the standard it should meet. The so-called interesting, in my understanding, is what the master said. When I was writing Ing Xiu and the Chronicles of Suzaku, I always put these words in the synopsis. Although I rarely mentioned it in recent years, the truth is that I've always treated this as my goal in writing book. Because it's rare for me to have a career that I like, I don't want to waste it. I want to do interesting things and live an interesting life. That is my explanation. If you do not understand, I understand and apologize. If you do understand, I thank you most sincerely. The reason why I'm explaining this is because I don't want you to think that I'm disappointing when you're working so hard to support me. I want to explain that I'm not lazy or not working hard. At least for this month, I want to write more than anyone else, and I will work hard to write more. Tomorrow's update might be a little late. Thank you for your continued support and understanding. Please continue to support me. I will continue to write as hard as I did today and strive to write a good plot. Finally, please cast your monthly vote. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 680. The Emperor smiled and then turned to walk down the gate tower. The commander of the Yulin Royal Guards and the head of the bodyguards quickly followed. Another servant handed him armor and sword. It seemed that they were going to war. Master Huang Yang was stunned. He followed the emperor around the stone path at the top of the city and walked down the city. He asked, "Your Majesty, where are you going?" The emperor put on the heavy armor with the help of his servant. He said without looking back, "There will be turmoil in the eastern wilderness soon. I'm going to lead the army to suppress it." Master Huang Yang had studied Buddhism for many years, but he was not proficient in secular affairs and strategies. He was still confused. He thought that a war had just ended in the wilderness. Was there going to be another war soon? A Yulin Royal Guards brought a yellow horse and handed the reins to Master Huang Yang. The emperor sat on the horse and looked at him. He said, "If you are worried about my safety, then come with me." Master Huangyang took the reins, still wondering what the emperor was going to do. The emperor put his right hand on his face and confirmed that the armor was fine. He said, "From this moment on, the Tang Empire will face the threat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. So I'm going to attack first." Master Huangyang was shocked and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to declare war on Haotian?" The Tang Empire had been established for 1,000 years and had fought with countless countries in the world. But even during the years of continuous war, it had never had a direct conflict with the West Hill Divine Palace. Both sides knew clearly where the line was. The West Hill Divine Palace did not want to face the most powerful country in the world, and the Tang Empire did not want to be the enemy of the whole world. After all, most of the Tang people were also believers of Haotian. The emperor said calmly, "The headmaster has declared war on Haotian." At this time, General Han Qing rushed out of the gate tower and grabbed the reins of the emperor's horse tightly. He said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, let me go. There is a movement in the Golden Palace. Please stay in Helan City." The emperor said, "Although Chanyu of the Golden Tribe is ambitious, he does not have the guts to face me. The so-called unusual movements are all in the future. Within 10 days, his elite cavalry will not be able to reach Helan City. By then, my army will have already returned." The wilderness was deathly silent. For a long time after the black carriage disappeared, no one dared to speak. The only thing that could be heard was the heavy breathing of hundreds of thousands of people and the low neighing of war horses. The light and the night, the golden dragon and the divine general, were finally ended by the sword of the human world. They turned into a sky full of stars and fell on the wilderness. Then, the wind rose, the rain fell, the smoke and dust dispersed, and the blue sky reappeared. These scenes had completely surpassed the wildest imagination of mankind. This story had completely surpassed all human experience. Shock, awe, and fear lingered in the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people for a long time. The more powerful a person was, the easier it was for him to wake up. On the giant chariot in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp, the tall figure behind the heavy curtains slowly stood up. He no longer looked at the desolate man's tribe in the north, but at the Tang army in the west. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace held the divine scepter in his hand and looked at the Tang cavalrymen, who were as shocked as the allied forces but looked proud. He remained silent. The sword split the sky, then killed the divine general, and then slaughtered the golden dragon. Today, the headmaster had shown the peak of the human world, an almost miraculous ability. He was the dean of the academy and the spiritual pillar of the Tang Empire, so of course the Tangs would be proud. But in the eyes of the West Hill Divine Palace and the millions of Haotian believers in the world, the headmaster's action was a great disrespect to the will of Haotian. It was an unforgivable blasphemy. The light was about to defeat the darkness, but the headmaster stood in front of the light and saved the daughter of Yama. The sacrifices made by all the countries in the human world were in vain. The Tang Empire was proud because of the headmaster, so it had to bear the price of this pride. The hierarch lord's low and solemn voice echoed in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army gradually came to their senses. The way they looked at the Tang army in the west gradually became complicated. There was vigilance, disgust, anger, and finally hatred. Smoke and dust rose. Shrill whistling and clattering of hooves were heard. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army slowly changed their battle formation and began to attack the Tang army in the west. Half of the Northeast Border Cavalry and 1/3 of the Northern Expeditionary Army were on this wilderness. The number of soldiers was the largest the Tang Empire had mobilized in recent years. Coupled with the Tang cavalry's widely recognized combat power, the Tang army alone was enough to wipe out a small country like the Song dynasty and the Qi dynasty. But this war in the wilderness was launched by the West Hill Divine Palace. The countries in the Central Plains had sent their most powerful troops, the most powerful cultivators and warriors. The number was almost 4 times that of the Tang army, so there was a possibility of victory. The smoke and dust gradually settled. The wilderness under the blue sky and white clouds was covered by the cavalry. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was divided into 2 different camps. The atmosphere became extremely tense. The original opponent of the Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Desolate Man tribe, had become insignificant. A shrill whistle sounded, and the war began without warning. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which had an absolute advantage in numbers, finally defeated the right front of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire after paying the price of more than 30,000 lives. They besieged the Tang cavalry in the wilderness. But whether it was the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace or the royal generals of the Yin, Jin, Song, and Qi dynasty, they all knew very well that the Divine Palace Coalition Army would have to pay a heavy price if they wanted to defeat the Tang army. But they still had to do it, because the Tang Empire had turned its back on Haotian, because the headmaster made all of them feel fear. In order to erase this fear, they had to stand firmly on the side of Haotian and seize the opportunity in front of them. At this moment, the sound of hooves thundered. Countless cavalry came from the east. They were dressed in black armor and had a murderous aura. They rushed into the wilderness like a black torrent. In the blink of an eye, they broke the formation of the Divine Palace Coalition Army. The world-famous black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire had arrived. The flag of the Tang Empire fluttered, and under it was the emperor himself. The black horse carriage galloped on the wilderness. It was late spring, but the wilderness was not desolate. The ground was covered with lush green grass. As far as the eye could see, the green spread to the horizon, like a green carpet dotted with small white flowers. The small white flowers were flocks of sheep, and there were real small white flowers looming in the grass. The spring wind blew. The big black horse kept shaking its head and ran excitedly. Its hooves trampled on the grass, kicking up black mud and flower petals. Some petals floated to its big nostrils. It was so beautiful that it wanted to neigh loudly. Thinking of the sublime being in the carriage behind it, it did not dare to neigh loudly. It suppressed the excitement of escaping death and panted heavily. It looked like it was giggling. Ningke picked up a cup of tea and handed it to the headmaster. He said, "Teacher, have some tea." At this moment, he was in a very good mood. If he fully revealed the smile in his heart, there would be many more dimples on his face. He felt that it would be disrespectful to the headmaster, so he forced himself to suppress it. He suppressed it to the point that his lips were trembling, which made his smile look silly. Sang Sang sat by the window, nervously holding the corner of her sleeves. She looked at the headmaster, who had unceremoniously occupied the soft couch from the moment he got on the carriage. Her smile was a little silly and also very silly. The headmaster took the cup of hot tea and took a sip. He looked at the two and said, "Why are you giggling?" Ningke giggled and said honestly, "Other than giggling, I really don't know what to do at this moment." Sang Sang nodded and giggled foolishly. The headmaster turned the head of the giant golden dragon into a ball of light and poured it into her body. The cold aura in her body suddenly disappeared, leaving only a few traces. It was no longer a threat. What was more amazing was that she could clearly feel that there was a very fresh aura of life in her body. The aura was not as pure as Haotian's divine light and Yama's imprint. It seemed a little complicated. The aura of life was all-encompassing. There were flowers, fish and birds, wind, frost, rain, dew, snow lotus in the willow lake, the steam in the bun shop, and the oil under the hot and sour noodle soup stall. The aura of life contained everything in the human world. Naturally, there were many impurities, even filthy things. However, it seemed that it was because of these impurities that it seemed so fresh, because it was real. Sang Sang did not understand what the headmaster had done to her, but she vaguely understood that the key was not the ball of divine light that was poured into her body. It was this fresh aura of life that could cure her. The illness that no one could cure was cured by the headmaster with a single move. They had fled for thousands of miles, gone through hardships, and finally saw the divine punishment of Haotian in despair. But the headmaster had cured her with a single move. In the past 2 years, on this day, Ning Ke and Song Song's emotions were on a roller coaster. They had received too many shocks. At this time, as he said, they really did not know what to do other than giggling. After a while, he gradually calmed down and sobered up. Thinking about what had happened before, he frowned slightly and said worriedly, "Teacher, the West Hill Divine Palace will not let it go so easily." The headmaster handed the teacup to him and said, "What does that have to do with me? Have another cup of tea." Ning Ke smiled bitterly and poured the hot tea into the cup. He thought that for the headmaster, the anger of the West Hill Divine Palace was not as important as a cup of hot tea, but the Tang Empire would definitely be affected. "Teacher, aren't you worried that Haotian will vent his anger on Chang'an? Will Haotian be so bored? What about the West Hill Divine Palace? If His Majesty was not His Majesty, he would still be studying in the back of the mountain of the Academy. According to the time, it should be your 6th brother. Since he is now in the wilderness, what do you think I need to worry about? But it is still very dangerous. Teacher, why don't you do something? Would I be so bored?" Hearing this extremely casual and irresponsible answer, Ning Ke opened his mouth wide, and did not know what to say. If someone dared to compare him with Haotian in the past, he would definitely think that the person was crazy. However, after witnessing the divine battle today, he knew that the headmaster was not crazy. He thought for a while and said, "Heaven's way is heartless, but teacher, you are a person with feelings." The headmaster asked, "Is the wilderness full of people?" Ning Ke nodded. The headmaster pointed to himself and said, "I am also a person, right?" Ning Ke thought of the tall figure in the bright sky holding a sword and slaying a dragon. After a long hesitation, he said, "You should, maybe, still be a person?" The headmaster was furious upon hearing this. His beard fluttered and he scolded, "What maybe? I am a person. If I am not a person, then what am I?" Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "You are right, but what does this have to do with our discussion?" The headmaster said, "Since I am a person, can I kill everyone in the world? This kind of thing is really meaningless. I don't want to waste time on it." Ning Ke asked seriously, "Then what do you think is interesting?" The headmaster said leisurely, "Fighting with heaven is endless joy, and only then can one think big. I've used up all my brainpower. I'll write 1 chapter today, and then I'll go and change the introduction. The introduction of Jiang Ye's book should have been this sentence. It's just that in order to avoid spoilers in the past, I've used the current version. Also, I'm rather infuriated when I saw some rather negative comments. Yeah, I admit my mistake. In the future, I won't do such things that affect my writing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 681. Ning Ke said, "Actually, fighting with others is also a very interesting thing." The headmaster glanced at him and said, "What a loser." Ning Ke laughed and thought that he was not qualified to fight with heaven like the headmaster. He had been fighting with others all these years and had long gotten used to the joy and anger in it. The spring breeze entered the carriage. It was calm and joyful. They had finally escaped death and separation. The people in the carriage relaxed and then started to complain. It was the students complaining to the headmaster. "Why didn't you do anything all these years? Was it because it was too boring? If you had taken action, eldest senior brother wouldn't have been so tired, and there would have been fewer casualties." The headmaster sniffed the tea and looked at Sang Sang. He said, "I don't care how many people will die. I just don't know what is the right choice and what is good for the world." Ning Ke said, "Since you don't care how many people die, why do you care about what is good for the world?" The headmaster said, If a tail of silver falls on the ground in front of you, will you pick it up? Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at each other and saw each other's determination. Ning Ke said, "Of course I will." The headmaster was drinking tea, and almost spat it out when he heard this. This was a well-designed course, but it could not be successfully carried out by Ning Quebec. He could not help but feel annoyed and said, "I won't pick it up." Ning Ke saw that the headmaster was in a bad mood and did not dare to say more. He said, "You can pick it up if you want." The headmaster said again, "But if a banknote of 10,000 taels of silver falls on the ground, I will definitely pick it up." Ning Ke understood what the headmaster meant. He thought that the headmaster's clear calculation of life and interests was indeed a little cold. He sighed and said, "I know that I am cold-blooded, but I did not expect that you are the same kind of person." The headmaster said, "It's not cold, it's just indifferent. When you see something many times, it will naturally become indifferent. I have lived for so many years and my friends and relatives have gradually separated. I have long seen death as indifferent. It is just the end of nature. There is no difference between dying earlier or later." Ning Ke asked, "Then why did you choose to fight against Haotian after hesitating for so long and even after so many years?" The headmaster leaned on the couch and looked at the blue sky and white clouds through the skylight. He said, "Because, in the end, I still found that I do not like and even hate Haotian." Ning Ke thought that you were probably the only one in the world who was qualified to make such an emotional comment on Haotian. The headmaster looked back at Ning Ke and said, "Of course, you are my student. You are too involved in this matter. That is why I have to intervene." Ning Ke was moved by her words, but he did not want to show it out of habit, so he forced himself to bear it. How could the headmaster not see through his feelings? He said discontentedly, "It's rare for me to be so brave. Can't you be moved to tears? Why do you have to put up with it?" Ning Ke looked at him and said sincerely, "Teacher is mighty." Thinking of the headmaster's words about rare bravery, he was slightly startled and asked, "Didn't you say that fighting against the heavens is an endless joy? Rare bravery? Could it be that today is your first time fighting?" "If you're talking about fighting, then you're right. Today is my first time fighting Haotian." The headmaster put down the teacup and said, "There are many ways to fight. Fighting is not the only way to fight. I have fought with Haotian for more than 1,000 years and used all kinds of method. Only an idiot like your youngest uncle would always want to fight with Haotian. He did not think about what would happen if he lost." This sentence was dragged out a little, and it sounded a little desolate and regretful. Ning Ke filled the empty teacup with hot tea and took a handkerchief to wipe the tea from his beard. He said with a smile, "Didn't you win today?" The headmaster slapped away his hypocritical hand and was angry at his stupidity. He scolded, "What I won today was just a manifestation of Haotian's will, not Haotian himself. If this is considered a victory, how could your youngest uncle die back then? If he heard what you said, he would be so angry that he would come back to life again." Ning Ke said shamelessly, "My level is too low. I still need you to explain." The giant golden dragon and the divine guard of light on the golden chariot are all illusions created by Haotian's divine light. They look scary, but in fact they are not powerful at all. After saying this, the headmaster dipped his finger into the teacup, dipped it in the hot tea, and flicked it into the air. The tea droplets floated in the air, reflecting the sunlight coming in through the skylight and condensing into a tiny golden dragon. Ning Ke looked at this scene and felt the pressure of light from the golden dragon in front of him. He was shocked speechless and thought to himself, "How much shock is the headmaster trying to give me?" Then he confirmed that the headmaster was right. The giant golden dragon and the divine guard of light that appeared in the sky of the wilderness today were enough to kill most cultivators in the world. However, if it was the eldest brother who ran the fastest or the chief preaching monk who was invincible, they might really be able to defeat them. At least they would not lose too quickly. The horse carriage galloped on the wilderness. The grass was broken and the wild flowers scattered. The warm spring breeze came in through the window. Sang Sang coughed softly. Ning Ke asked worriedly, "Headmaster, what should we do next? Is Sang Sang's illness okay?" The headmaster flicked his finger again, and the vivid golden dragon of light in the carriage disappeared instantly. It turned into tea droplets and fell on the floor like morning dew. Light is existence and darkness is nothingness. Turning existence into nothingness is like being blind. So we can't count on Haotian's divine light to suppress the imprint of Yama in her body. The Buddhism Dharma emphasizes self-enlightenment. It's still a self-deceiving method that can't be completely eliminated. The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and said, "I've thought about it and finally decided to use the power of the human world to leave the imprint of Yama in your body in the human world. You can blend with the light so that Yama can't detect it. The human world is the hottest, most chaotic, and most real. It can make the pure no longer pure, turn cold into warmth, and turn heat into smoke. It's a process of creating something out of nothing." Ning Ke thought for a long time and realized that it was impossible for him to understand these words with his wisdom and state. He sincerely asked, "Headmaster, what is the power of the human world? What should we do?" "What should we do? I've already done it." The headmaster was a little surprised and said, "I chopped off the dragon's head and used Haotian's divine light to suppress the imprint of Yama in Sang Sang's body. I also poured the power of the human world into her body. What else do you want me to do?" Ning Ke widened his eyes and asked, "What is the power of the human world?" "I am the human world, and my power is the power of the human world." The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and laughed happily. Ning Ke also laughed, but it was a little silly. Looking at the two of them laughing heartily, Sang Sang also laughed, but her smile seemed a little strange. Her smile was silly and cute, but the smile in her eyes was very indifferent. She was obviously one person, but she had two kinds of smiles. She was sitting by the window, but she seemed to be sitting in the sky, overlooking the earth. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 682. The smile in Sang Sang's eyes was very indifferent. In the dictionary there were many explanations for indifference, such as the appearance of indifference, coldness, or ignorance. These explanations were very suitable for her, who often revealed her natural dullness, especially ignorance. At this moment, she sat by the window and looked at the headmaster and Ning Quebec. It was just like the giant golden dragon peeking out from behind the burning clouds in the sky of the wilderness, and the divine warrior of light standing in the chariot overlooking the earth. However, her position seemed to be higher, so the indifference in her eyes fell on another field. There was another explanation for indifference. It was to suppress happiness and reject life. It was to stay away from beauty and other words with the aura of the human world. It represented holiness and solemnity beyond the secular world. An indifferent smile appeared at the bottom of Sang Sang's eyes and disappeared in an instant. She did not feel anything, so Ning Ke naturally did not see it. But the headmaster of the academy did. The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and was silent for a long time. When Ning Ke felt that it was a little strange and Sang Sang's eyes showed confusion and helplessness, he smiled and looked away. The headmaster's eyes fell on Sang Sang's hand. Sang Sang's left hand clenched into a fist. From the Lank Temple, to escaping from Yueluan Kingdom's Chaoyang City, to being taken in by the desolate man's tribe, she had always held it in her left hand. The headmaster's eyes fell on Sang Sang's left hand, revealing something in her palm. It was a white chess piece. The headmaster's expression was as calm as an old pine that had experienced countless autumns and winters. His eyes, however, were not calm. Billions of stars appeared in his black pupils and then began to move irregularly, drawing countless dense lines and finally condensing into a bright spot. This happened in an instant. No one could see what happened in the headmaster's eyes. Ning Ke could not see it, Sang Sang could not see it, even if everyone in the world stood in front of the headmaster. The bright spot in the depths of the headmaster's eyes suddenly exploded. The headmaster closed his eyes and then opened them again. His eyes returned to normal, his black robe did not move, his expression was still calm, and his wrinkles still seemed to contain infinite wisdom. As if nothing had happened. As if everything had already happened. The wall of the black carriage was engraved with extremely complicated talisman arrays, which originated from the scriptures of the South Gate Temple of Haotian and were created by Master Yen Sei at the cost of half of his life. They were extremely exquisite and difficult to break. The moment the headmaster opened his eyes again, the talisman array on the wall of the carriage suddenly seemed to be injected with an endless amount of extra aura. The calm talisman intent suddenly became chaotic, and the talisman lines shone with golden light and then dimmed. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. At this time, the talisman array suddenly failed and the wheels immediately sank deep into the soft ground of the spring wilderness. The leather rope deeply cut into the muscles of the big black horse. The big black horse was not prepared at all. It did not expect that the carriage behind it would suddenly become so heavy. Its front hooves rose into the air, and then it suddenly knelt down and fell heavily to the ground. The big black horse neighed in pain, and the grass beneath it was crushed into a ball. The wild flowers in the grass scattered and floated up in the dust, gradually disappearing into the clouds. The wilderness was clear for thousands of miles, with only a few clouds floating leisurely. In the blue sky above the black carriage, there was a cloud made of rain. When the wildflowers floated up, there would be rain falling, like a thin water column, falling on the carriage. The pitter-patter sounded like crying. Looking from the ground of the wilderness, the sun just moved behind the rain cloud. The clear sunlight penetrated the 3 cracks in the cloud, and it was slightly bright. 2 of the 3 cracks were on the top, and 1 was on the bottom. They were like a person's eyes and lips, squinting like a cute smile on an innocent face. The headmaster was very annoyed. He waved his hand and the clouds and rain disappeared. He said, crying and laughing at the same time, "Are you sick?" Ning Ke did not know what had happened at all. He said, "Teacher, Sang Sang is sick." The headmaster looked at him and shouted, "Do you have medicine?" Ning Ke did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Don't you have medicine?" The headmaster became more and more displeased. He said, "She has already taken the medicine. Why do you mention it?" Ning Ke was speechless. He thought that all the disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that the headmaster was not an otherworldly sublime person. He had a temper, but it was too sudden and unnecessary today. "Teacher, what on earth happened?" he asked worriedly. The headmaster was silent for a moment. He suddenly said, "I'm a little hungry. What do you want to eat?" Ning Ke looked at the slightly damp wilderness outside the carriage window. He thought that in such a desolate place, what else could they eat other than dry food? The headmaster glanced at Sang Sang and said, "Since you are still alive, you should live well. You should have some requirements for the quality of life. How can you eat so casually? I'll take you to eat something delicious." The big black horse got rid of the dizziness caused by the collision. After confirming that the carriage had become light again, it followed the headmaster's instructions and galloped toward the north of the wilderness. Along the way, they could only hear the wind whistling and see the grass shining. It didn't take long for the black horse carriage to arrive at a meadow. There were dozens of sheep scattered around the meadow. There were a few tents at the side and back. It seemed to be a herdsman's tribe, but it was too small. Ning Ke got off the horse carriage and looked at the angle of the sun. There were still snow hills in the distance. He looked at the length of the grass and confirmed that they were at the extreme north of the wilderness. He couldn't understand how the horse carriage could travel so far in such a short time. Several dark-skinned herdsmen walked out of the tent. They looked alert and panicked. It seemed that these herdsmen rarely met outsiders. Ning Ke didn't know what the headmaster brought them here to eat. As the saying goes, a disciple should do his best. He walked toward the herdsman and wanted to see if there was any food in the tents so that he could buy it. He knew the barbarian language of the wilderness and was even good at some remote tribal dialect. However, he suddenly realized that he couldn't communicate with the herdsmen in the wilderness. "Don't show off your little tricks." The headmaster walked down from the horse carriage and reprimanded him. The herdsmen reacted strangely when they saw the headmaster. They were touched, excited, and more in awe. Two of them knelt in front of the headmaster and kissed his feet. The other herdsmen ran to their own tents and brought their wives, children, and elders out. Then they bowed to the headmaster. Ning Ke realized that these herdsmen had seen the headmaster before. He couldn't help but wonder which palace these herdsmen belonged to and why they couldn't understand him. He was even more curious about how the headmaster would communicate with these herdsmen. He never thought that the headmaster couldn't communicate with these herdsmen, because now he was even more certain that the headmaster was omnipotent. The headmaster began to communicate with these herdsmen. He pointed to the sheep on the meadow in the distance and spread out his hands to measure the size of the sheep. Then he moved his fingers up to the sky to simulate the appearance of a flame. He kept mumbling, "The sheep can't be too big. It's only this big. If you want to roast it, use the roasting method you're best at." Ning Ke was speechless again. He didn't expect the headmaster to communicate in this way. The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, "I've always said that there is no omnipotent person in the world. Even I can't understand all the languages in the world. But so what? Language is a small trick. As long as you know how to gesture, you won't starve to death and you can find delicious food anywhere." Ning Ke knew that trying to reason with his teacher was an extremely masochistic idea. Therefore, he firmly gave up and asked his own doubts, "Which palace does this small tribe belong to?" The headmaster said, "It doesn't belong to any palace. These herdsmen have been nomadic in this bitter and cold land for thousands of years. They don't communicate with the outside world. Although their lives are hard, it's peaceful." Ning Ke said, "There are only so many people. It's hard for them to reproduce." The headmaster said, "The butcher hid here for a period of time. He must have taught these herdsmen some secret method." Ning Ke heard about the butcher and the drunkard from the headmaster and was slightly surprised. The headmaster said again, "The butcher's roasted leg of lamb is the best. I don't know where he is now and he refused to see me for many years. So the best leg of lamb in the world is here." Ning Ke laughed and said, "The secret method you mentioned, is it to carry on the family line or roast the leg of lamb?" The headmaster laughed and slapped his thigh. He said, "Both." Sang Sang gave 2 bowls of milk wine to the headmaster and Ning Quebec. The headmaster took a sip and praised it. Then he said to her, "You should try it too. It tastes good." At this moment, the leg of lamb was finally roasted. The herdsman respectfully brought it over and left. Ning Ke didn't know how to describe the best roasted leg of lamb in the world. He smelled the aroma of the leg of lamb and looked at the oil on the leg. He was tempted. But at this moment, he would never make a mistake. Following the instructions of Chun Pippi and eldest brother, he used a sharp knife to cut 2 pieces of the best part of the leg of lamb and brought it to the headmaster's mouth. The headmaster chewed the lamb and closed his eyes. He held the bowl of milk wine and looked very intoxicated. He was waiting for the next moment to use the milk wine to turn the aroma of the lamb into a charming drunkenness. Something is wrong. The headmaster suddenly opened his eyes. Then he smacked his lips like an old farmer who had just finished eating noodles. He carefully tasted the taste in his mouth, and his expression suddenly changed. He said, "This lamb is wrong." Ning Ke was stunned. He cut another piece of the roasted leg of lamb and put it into his mouth. The meat was so delicious that he almost chewed off his tongue. He wondered what was wrong. He asked, "Teacher, what's wrong?" The headmaster said angrily, "This lamb doesn't taste like lamb. How can it be called lamb? Ning Ke didn't understand. How did it not taste like lamb? The headmaster suddenly fell silent. He looked at the roasted leg of lamb and sighed. Then he looked at Sang Sang and shook his head with a sigh. Sang Sang didn't understand what was going on. She whispered, "Do you want a bowl of lamb soup?" The headmaster said angrily, "I can't even eat the meat. How can I drink soup?" Goo 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 goo. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 683. Mutton did not taste like mutton, but it was still meat after all. It was a happy thing to have meat to eat. Therefore, the headmaster could only continue to eat meat after he was vexed and angry. However, he kept sighing as he ate. He looked at the mutton in his hand and sighed at Sang Sang and the sky. Sang Sang didn't understand what was going on. Ning Ke didn't understand either. He patted her on the shoulder, indicating that it was okay. He moved to the headmaster's side and asked in a low voice, "Teacher, is this a troublesome matter?" He was referring to the matter of the headmaster saving Sang Sang and fighting with Haotian. The headmaster said sadly, "Of course it is troublesome." Ning Ke was slightly afraid and asked in a trembling voice, "Will Sang Sang be all right?" The headmaster was furious and scolded, "You only care about your wife and not about me, your teacher? Do you know what filial piety means? She has taken the medicine, what else can happen to her? Are you afraid that she will die? Even if I die, she may not die. What I care about now is meat. I don't like meat anymore." Ning Ke lifted his sleeves and wiped the spittle and grease off his face. He thought that the headmaster's temper was getting worse. Could it be that he was tired from the fight with the divine general of light? Thinking of this, he was no longer dissatisfied. He and Sang Sang quickly served the headmaster of the academy meat and wine. While serving the soup, Sang Sang comforted him softly. It is said that when people get old, their tempers become like that of a child. We just need to coax them. Ning Ke looked back at the headmaster who was cursing and drinking on the meadow. He said worriedly, "I can bear with the headmaster's temper, but I feel that something is wrong." The roasted leg of mutton was not finished. Although Ning Ke and Sang Sang thought it was the best leg of mutton they had ever eaten in their lives, their appetite was limited, and the headmaster did not like it. The headmaster was the one who ate the most in the academy. Ning Ke and Sang Sang, who had been a cook in the academy for a long time, knew this very well. Ning Ke even felt that the ranking of the academy's strength had nothing to do with the time of joining the academy. It all depended on who ate the most. For example, the eldest brother looked gentle and calm, but if he really ate without restraint, the second brother would not be as good as him. Sang Sang asked the headmaster, "Headmaster, what should we do with the rest of the mutton? Send them back to their tents? They eat these roasted lamb legs every day and are already sick of it. How would they be willing to eat the leftovers? It would be a waste to give it to them." The headmaster motioned for her to put down the remaining roasted leg of lamb. Then he whistled toward the snow-capped hills in the north. The whistle was not loud, but it traveled far. The sheep that were grazing in the meadow raised their heads one after another. Not long after, the ground of the wilderness trembled slightly. The sheep in the meadow seemed to have sensed great fear and fled in all directions towards the south. Some of the sheep even fainted and pretended to be dead. The big black horse was chewing on a lamb leg at the bottom of the meadow. Suddenly, it raised its head and stared vigilantly at the north. The hair on its neck danced in the wind, as if it was about to stand up. A huge snowfield giant wolf and a relatively skinny male wolf slowly walked over from the snowy hill in the north of the meadow. They didn't even look at the fainted sheep in the meadow, and kept moving forward. The big black horse showed its white teeth and roared fiercely at the two wolves in the distance. It knew very well how terrifying the snowfield giant wolf was and how much more terrifying the seemingly skinny male wolf was. But since the headmaster was beside it, it thought that it was invincible. When the female snowfield giant wolf sat down, there seemed to be a small snow mountain on the meadow. Sang Sang looked at it curiously and reached out to touch it. She found that the skin of the snowfield giant wolf was very soft. The snowfield giant wolf didn't have any reaction and let Sang Sang touch it calmly. It looked extremely docile. When it smelled a very faint scent from Sang Sang, it seemed to miss and comfort her in its eyes. The thin and weak male wolf sat in front of the headmaster with its two front paws in front of its chest, like a disciple bowing. Ning Kai stood behind the headmaster and looked at the scene. He found it very interesting. The headmaster motioned for Ning Kai to pass the remaining roasted lamb leg to it. After receiving the lamb leg, the skinny male wolf didn't eat it immediately. Instead, it bowed respectfully to the headmaster and then looked at his wife with a dignified look. The snow-white snowfield giant wolf left Sang Sang reluctantly and came to the headmaster to bow. The headmaster looked at the messy fur of the male wolf and knew that the wolves had a hard time in the wilderness after they went south these years. He reached out and gently stroked its head. The skinny male wolf didn't move and let the headmaster stroke it. Its body trembled slightly, and it seemed to be very excited and happy. The headmaster looked at it and said, "I don't know if I can see you in the future, so I asked you to come here." At this time, Sang Sang walked over and listened to the headmaster's words. Somehow, she felt a little sad. The headmaster looked at her and said, "They are the parents of Tang Tang's little white wolf." Sang Sang then knew why the female snowfield giant wolf showed such an expression. She must have missed her child in the back mountain of the academy. The sadness in her heart grew stronger. After the snowfield giant wolf couple left, the black horse carriage also left the herdsman's tribe. The horse hooves with the fragrance of mutton fell and rose on the grassland, leaving footprints that attracted many ants. In the carriage, Sang Sang was massaging the headmaster's back. She seemed to have fully recovered and was good at serving people. The headmaster also liked being served by her. His eyes gradually closed and he seemed to be falling asleep. Ning Kai looked at Sang Sang and smiled, silently thanking her for her hard work. Sang Sang smiled and shook her head, indicating that she was not tired at all and that she was very willing to serve the headmaster. Although there were many barbarians living in the vast wilderness, compared to the Central Plains, it was still a sparsely populated place. They often ran for days without meeting a single person. The journey was very quiet and Ning Kai was about to fall asleep. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the window. There were peddlers, people shouting to open the road, waiter greeting guests, horse hooves and greetings. Why did the wilderness suddenly become so lively? Did the big black horse find a big tribe? Ning Kai was confused. He opened the curtains and looked outside. Then his body suddenly stiffened. Sang Sang came to the window and poked her head out. She was so shocked by what she saw that she almost screamed out loud. The black horse carriage was stopped on a busy long street. The streets were crowded with buildings, pedestrians weaved in and out, shops like a forest. Peddlers called out their wares one after another. Sedan bearers shouted as they carried their sedan chairs, and arrogant young men rode past on their horses. Ning Kai did not know where they were, but he was very sure that it could not be the wilderness. The headmaster woke up and looked at the young couple who were in a daze by the window. He asked, "Have we arrived?" Sang Sang nodded subconsciously. Then she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She looked back at the headmaster and said, "We have arrived, but we don't know where." The headmaster looked out of the window and said, "Yes, this is the capital of the Kingdom of Song." Ning Kai and Sang Sang were both shocked. They could not understand how they had arrived at the capital of the Kingdom of Song a moment ago when they were still eating roasted lamb in the extreme north of the wilderness. The Kingdom of Song was on the shore of the East Sea, thousands of miles away from the north of the wilderness. The one who was the most shocked was the big black horse. It had been pulling the carriage all the way. Ning Kai and Sang Sang did not see the process, but it saw it clearly. There was grass in front of it, but when its hooves landed, it landed on the bluestone road. The sudden change of thousands of miles scared it so much that its hooves became weak. There were many things that normal people would never be able to do. But as long as the headmaster helped, nothing was impossible. For example, Sang Sang was seriously ill and Ning Ke was injured all over. But now they were all healed. There were many things that could not be understood, but as long as it was related to the headmaster, then it could be understood. Ning Ke and Sang Sang now had such a thought. Because the headmaster was not human. Ning Ke even thought that the headmaster was not human. The black horse carriage moved slowly on the bustling street of the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The Taoist temple was surrounded by a dense crowd, praying for the holy war in the wilderness. They did not know the outcome of the holy war, nor did they know that the most important person in the war had now come to the Kingdom of Song, to their side. When the dark night faded and the light gradually faded, the blue sky and white clouds reappeared. The people of the Kingdom of Song stood up from the ground. Their lives had returned to normal at an unimaginable speed. Not everyone was still concerned about what had happened in the wilderness of the north. Some people had already begun to care about their small businesses and their own careers. The black horse carriage stopped in front of an inconspicuous restaurant. The restaurant was already bustling with noise and the sound of drinking and fists could be heard incessantly. The headmaster led Ning Ke and Sang Sang into the restaurant. They passed by the diners and drunkards and came to the relatively quiet third floor. A moment ago they were kneeling on the ground and shivering. Now they are drinking and eating. The business of the restaurant is so good, not only because of the fear, but also because everyone needs to eat. The headmaster looked at the diners downstairs and said, "For ordinary people, eating is always the most important thing, because eating is for living. And living is more important than the war in the wilderness, more important than law, more important than morality, more important than faith, more important than anything else. Living is the most important thing. It's the only purpose of living. Anything like emotions or knowledge is just an accessory to living. I have to understand this order." Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "But there must be some meaning to living, or it will be meaningless." The headmaster said, "Of course there must be some pursuit. But you must first live, then you are qualified to find meaning." Absolute self-interest? Against all sacrifices? I am not talking about one person's life, but the life of many people. It seems very complicated. Teacher, what are you trying to teach me? I want to tell you that since living is the most important thing in the world, then eating is the most important thing in the world. Ning Ke touched his belly and thought that he had just eaten roast lamb leg. What else was he going to eat? Before he could figure it out, the headmaster had already picked up the menu and ordered 18 dishes. I suddenly want to change the introduction to, "This is the story of an old foodie and many young foodies." If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 684. The headmaster loved to eat and was good at it. As long as he was present, it was not up to others to order the dishes. As the saying goes, hot and cold meat and vegetables, the monarch, the minister, and the assistant, the combination was extremely refreshing. Just looking at the menu was enough to make people drool. Those dishes looked simple, but the ingredients were actually very exquisite and needed to be made on the spot. There was still some time before the dishes would be served, but the headmaster had already made the arrangements. A basin of iced mashed taro was placed on the table. Desserts are supposed to be sweet. What I despise the most are those gourmets who want their desserts to be light. If you want it to be light, you can just drink water. Why would you eat sweets? The headmaster scooped a bowl of ice sweet mashed yam for Sang Sang and motioned for her to eat more. Then he scooped a bowl for himself and looked at Ning Quebec. "It's fun to fight with heaven, but why?" Ning Ke, who was serving himself mashed taro, could not help but be startled when he heard this. He thought that just a moment ago they were talking about the knowledge of ordering dishes and the principles of eating and drinking, and the next moment they were talking about the grand topic of fighting with the heavens. It was really too sudden. The headmaster said, "Did the little monk Chishan tell you about these things in the Lank Temple?" Ning Ke recalled the conversation he had with Master Chishan in front of the Buddha Hall in the autumn rain. In that conversation, Master Chishan mentioned the legends above the 5 states and the top few states in the human world, such as the immortality of the devil's doctrine, the nirvana of Buddhism, the ascension of Taoism, and the transcendence of the academy. At that time, Master Chishan had said that in tens of thousands of years, there would always be people who could reach the end of the long path of cultivation, or reach the other side, or become immortal. At that time, they would return to the embrace of Haotian. Ning Ke was most concerned about whether returning to the embrace of Haotian meant death or immortality. Master Chishan could not answer this question. In the past countless years, the Buddha and the Taoist predecessors who had reached that step could not answer this question either. This was the greatest temptation and the greatest fear of cultivation. At the end of the conversation, Ning Ke asked if there were any cultivators who could not ascend to heaven even if they reached that stage. Master Chishan's answer was that no one could escape the cycle of heaven. That day, the Buddhist temple was very desolate in the autumn rain, and the sky was very bleak. Ning Ke felt very cold because he once again discovered that Heaven's Way was indeed a very ruthless existence. Master Chishan had already passed away. Even if he had any thoughts now, he could not tell Ning Quebec. Ning Ke recalled the conversation and vaguely guessed what the headmaster wanted to say. His body stiffened. It was noisy downstairs of the restaurant, but the people upstairs were discussing the affairs of the mortal world. This strong contrast made him feel very strange and absurd, until he was at a loss. The headmaster said, "Why do we have to fight against heaven? First, we need to know what heaven is." Ning Ke recalled the conversation he had with his teacher under the starry night after reading the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in the back of the mountain of the academy. At the end of the conversation, the headmaster of the academy pointed to the night sky and said 4 sentences. "We don't know whether Haotian is alive or not. We don't know whether he has a specific form or not. We still don't know where Haotian is. However, whether he has consciousness or not, Junior Brother confirmed it with his death. If Heaven's Way really exists, it will look down on the world. Those people who struggle to survive on the earth, and even those cultivators who seem to be able to summon wind and rain, are just like ants. If the heavenly axiom does exist, it won't show the slightest mercy or attention to ants at all. When some of the ants suddenly raise their heads to look at it, and even begin to grow wings that are as thin as feathers and fly to the sky, trying to challenge it, how can its consciousness and will allow that to happen? If Heaven's Way really exists, it will be invisible and even more ruthless." These 4 sentences were Ning Ke's initial understanding of Haotian, or the so-called Heaven's Way. Now, he had been fleeing with Sang Sang for a long time. He had seen clouds and crows, half of it was light, and the other half was darkness. He had also seen the giant golden dragon stretching its head out and the divine Lord of Light coming to the world. Now, he had a deeper understanding of Heaven's Way, but so did the fear in his heart. Ning Ke looked at the cloudless blue sky outside the window of the restaurant and remained silent. The headmaster held a spoon and slowly scooped the mashed taro into his mouth. He leaned against the railing and looked rather relaxed. Then, he pointed the spoon at the sky outside the window and said, "Haotian is not the sky." Ning Ke asked, "Then what is Haotian?" Heaven was a very special word. It appeared many times in the language of the human world, and it often represented extremely strong emotions, such as fear, awe, or anger. For example, heaven has eyes, heaven has tears, or if heaven has feelings, heaven will grow old. There were also titles such as God's evil heaven, God's God, and so on. Even the most commonly used exclamations were related to heaven. Heaven. Heaven represented supremacy, omnipresence, irresistibility, benevolence and universal love, indifference and ruthlessness, and everything. Heaven's way is the rule. A straight line between 2 points is the shortest, a triangle is more stable than a quadrilateral, light travels the fastest, water always flows downwards, and burning requires air. These are the rules of the world and are heaven's way. The headmaster ate the mashed taro and said casually. Then, he threw the spoon in his hand out of the window. A moment later, there was a cry of pain from the street. A pedestrian must have been hit in the head. Just like water, everything has to fall downwards. This is also a rule. There was a quarrel below the restaurant. It was probably the pedestrian who had been hit in the head by the spoon and wanted to enter the restaurant to find the culprit. The headmaster pretended that nothing had happened. He looked at Ning Kei and continued, "Water will gather in the lowest part of the sea, and will not flow downwards. When the spoon falls on the ground or on the pedestrian's head, it will not continue to fall. This does not mean that the rule has been broken. It is just that another rule has begun to take effect. If it is not affected by external forces and there are no other rules, what would the situation be like? The spoon will continue to fall downwards until it falls into the abyss. Perhaps it will appear on Yama's dining table. Of course, I am more and more certain now that there is no underworld, and naturally there is no Yama." The headmaster put the empty bowl on the table and pushed it to Sang Sang. Sang Sang took the bowl and continued to scoop the mashed taro. The headmaster pointed at the bowl in Sang Sang's hand and said, "If this table is big and smooth enough, if the bottom of the bowl is smooth enough, if there is no girl named Sang Sang in the world who will pick up this bowl, then what will happen? Just like the spoon that keeps falling, this bowl will keep sliding forward." Ning Kei scratched his head and said, "Isn't this inertia?" "Inertia? That's a good word, but I like to call it the natural tendency of things or rules." The headmaster said, "This is also what I think of as life." Life? Ning Kei did not understand at all. He repeated in confusion, "Inertia is life?" The headmaster said, "When people are alive, they can walk, jump, think, eat, blink, and defecate. When they die, they become rotting corpses and bones, and they can't do any of these things. Their shape, composition, and characteristics are completely changed. When we are alive, we must ensure that we can continue to walk, jump, think, eat, blink, and defecate. We must ensure that we look like humans, which is to ensure that our shape, composition, and characteristics can continue to exist. This kind of existence is life." Ning Kei was very confused and said, "But animals can also walk, jump, eat, blink, and defecate." The headmaster said, "But they can't think." Ning Kei said, "The big yellow bull and youngest uncle's donkey can definitely think." The headmaster said, "But their shape is not like humans." Ning Kei said, "What if we can make them look like humans?" The headmaster said, "If you have this ability, then they are humans." Ning Kei shook his head and said, "How does this make sense?" The headmaster said, "Why doesn't it make sense?" Ning Kei was stunned for a moment, and then he finally figured it out. A life that looked exactly like a human could walk, jump, eat, blink, defecate, and think. Wouldn't that be a human? Everyone wants to live. They want to maintain their shape and internal existence. This is life. Looking at it more broadly, human society also wants to maintain its shape and internal existence. For example, words, paintings, and organizations. So this is also a kind of life. The headmaster said, "Stone also has life. It also wants to maintain its shape. Its means are hard. If you want to destroy its life, you have to overcome its hardness. Water also has life. It can be clear or muddy, vast or silent. If you want to change its shape and characteristics and destroy its life, you have to boil it and dry it. Life is the continuation of its own form. Since heaven's way is the rule itself, then if it also has life, its life is to ensure that these rules will always be effective and not be destroyed." Ning Kei did not know what to say at this time. Fortunately, the dishes were served. The three of them ate 18 dishes. It was a very sumptuous meal. The headmaster kept putting food into Sangsang's bowl, and then kept introducing and persuading her, "You have to try this dish. Poor child, you have not lived a good life with Ning Ke all these years. You have to know how many delicious and fun things there are in the world. You should follow me and enjoy these days." Ning Ke and Sangsang were a little full after eating the roasted lamb leg and tasting the dishes of the kingdom of Song. Fortunately, the headmaster was indeed a 1,000-year-old foodie. He finished all 18 dishes like a whirlwind. The headmaster drank a cup of double-sprouted vegetables to clear his stomach. He seemed to be enjoying it. Ning Ke burped. Thinking of what the headmaster had said, his mood was as heavy as his stomach. He rubbed his numb face and was ready to ask for clarification. The headmaster put down the teacup and said, "Haotian has two sides. One is the objectivity of rules, and the other is that it needs to maintain the objectivity of rules. Thus, it will show life like a living creature." Ning Ke asked, "So?" The headmaster pointed at the messy table and said, "People need to eat when they are alive, and it needs to eat when it is alive." Ning Ke looked at the dishes dripping with soup and suddenly felt very scared and disgusted. "I really want to curse and break down. This is the only chapter for today, and I will try to write more tomorrow. In fact, this is completely self-inflicted. The painful part is that there are still some plots in this area. The happy part is that this plot will be finished soon, and then Jiang Ye's book will never touch this kind of thing again. There is another very important thing to report to everyone. It is said that many friends think that Jiang Ye's book will be finished soon. This is still a long way from the end. The story of Ning Ke as the male lead and Sangsang as the female lead has just begun. I am a little nervous. Does everyone want to end the book earlier? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.